This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't sleep through the night without seeing her face. It's been 2 years since that weekend at Elk Ridge, and I still jump at the sound of knocking. I've tried therapy, meditation, even moved to a new city, but nothing erases what happened. I'm finally writing this down because keeping it bottled up is driving me insane. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can make sense of it, because I sure as hell can't. It was supposed to be a reunion trip. The 5 of us, me, Nate, Jess, Marco, and Danny, had been inseparable in college, but life pulled us in different directions after graduation. We'd been planning this winter getaway for months, a long weekend at this secluded cabin Nate's uncle owned in the mountains. Perfect for reconnecting, no distractions. But then Marco got engaged and couldn't make it. His fiancée had planned some surprise thing the same weekend. And Danny's mom had a health scare, so it ended up just being me, Nate, and Jess. We almost canceled. Jess actually suggested postponing until summer when everyone could make it, but Nate convinced us we'd regret missing the opportunity. "When's the next time all our schedules will align?" he'd asked during our group call. Besides, the cabin's gorgeous in winter. He wasn't wrong. When we pulled up that Friday afternoon after the 4-hour drive from the city, I couldn't believe how perfect it looked. The cabin sat on a ridge overlooking a frozen lake, surrounded by pine trees heavy with snow. It was like something from a Christmas card. Rustic wooden exterior, smoke curling from the chimney, icicles hanging from the roof. The sky was clear blue, and the whole scene was so quiet you could hear the snow crunching under our boots as we unloaded the car. "Holy shit, Nate," Jess said, squinting up at the cabin. "When you said cabin, I was picturing something way more murdery." That was classic Jess, always saying what everyone else was thinking. She'd been my roommate junior and senior year, and her bluntness had saved me from at least 2 terrible relationships. Nate just laughed and fumbled with the keys. "Uncle Rob fixed it up last summer. Wait till you see the view from the back deck." He wasn't exaggerating. The deck overlooked miles of wilderness, mountains stacked against the horizon. We stood there for a minute, just taking it in, until Jess complained about her fingers freezing off, and we headed inside to unpack. The first 2 days were exactly what we needed. We hiked through the woods surrounding the cabin, had snowball fights like we were kids again, and spent evenings playing cards by the fireplace while passing around the whiskey Nate had brought. Cell reception was spotty at best, which actually made the whole thing better. No constant checking of phones, no work emails. Jess kept us laughing with her stories from the publishing house where she worked, doing impressions of her nightmare boss that had me in tears. Nate was the same steady presence he'd always been, the guy who mediated our drunken debates in college and made sure everyone got home safe from parties. He'd become some kind of environmental consultant since graduation and seemed genuinely happy with his life. Saturday night, we stayed up late talking about the old days. I remember Jess curled up in an armchair, knees pulled to her chest, wearing that oversized red sweater she always traveled with, and the blue hand-knitted scarf her grandmother had made. She'd been letting her naturally curly hair grow out, and it framed her face in this wild way that suited her. "Remember Professor Daniels and his thing about making eye contact with every single student?" she asked, and Nate groaned dramatically. "God, front row was the worst. He'd just stare until you answered." We fell into reminiscing about people we'd lost touch with, embarrassing stories. The time Nate got so drunk at homecoming, He tried to climb the library statue and fell into the reflecting pool. Simple stuff, but it felt good, important somehow. None of us realized the weather was changing. Later, checking the forecasts, I found out the storm had shifted unexpectedly, accelerating faster than predicted. But that night, we just went to bed feeling content, connected. Sunday morning, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of wind howling around the cabin. When I pulled back the curtains, all I could see was white. Not the picturesque landscape from yesterday, but a wall of swirling snow that made it impossible to see more than a few feet past the window. At breakfast, Nate checked the weather alert on his phone, catching a brief moment of reception. "They're saying it could drop another 2 feet by tomorrow morning," he said, frowning at the screen. "Roads might be impassable for a day or two after that." Jess shrugged over her coffee. "So we're snowed in with food, booze, and board games. Could be worse." We spent the day inside, making the best of it. Nate found an old record player in a cabinet and some vinyl albums from the 70s. We cooked a huge pot of chili, drank too much wine, played Monopoly, which Jess won as always. Outside, the storm intensified. The wind made this low moaning sound as it wrapped around the cabin, and occasionally we'd hear a heavy thump as snow slid off the roof. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a different sound, footsteps crunching in the snow outside. At first I thought I'd dreamed it. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind, when I heard it again. Deliberate steps, like someone walking slowly around the perimeter of the cabin. I got out of bed, careful not to make any noise, and went to the window. The storm had eased slightly, the snowfall less intense, and the moon was now visible through breaks in the clouds, casting everything in a pale blue light. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the tree line, maybe 30 yards from the cabin. It was just a silhouette, completely still, facing the cabin. I couldn't make out features, just a dark shape against the snow. Something about the way it stood there, not moving despite the bitter cold, sent ice through my veins. I backed away from the window and went to Nate's room, shaking him awake. "Someone's outside," I whispered. He rubbed his eyes. "What? What time is it?" "There's someone standing in the trees watching the cabin." Nate grabbed his glasses and followed me back to my room. We peered out the window together, but the figure was gone. Just endless snow and trees. "You sure you saw something?" he asked, not dismissively, but with genuine concern. "The storm can play tricks with shadows." I nodded, though suddenly I wasn't certain. It was right there by that cluster of pines. We checked the other windows but saw nothing unusual. Nate suggested it might have been an animal, maybe a deer or even a moose. I agreed, if only to convince myself, and we went back to bed. But I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I mentioned it at breakfast. Jess immediately got excited. "Like a ghost or Bigfoot?" she asked, only half joking. I rolled my eyes. "Probably just a deer, like Nate said." But Jess wasn't letting it go. "Or some hermit who lives in these woods. Serial killers always have mountain cabins in the movies." "Not helping," I said. The storm intensified again that day. The wind was so strong it made the whole cabin creak, and the temperature dropped dramatically. We had to keep feeding the fireplace to maintain any warmth. By mid-afternoon, the power flickered, then went out completely. Nate found lanterns and candles in a storage closet, and we set them up around the main room, creating a small circle of light. As darkness fell outside, the cabin felt smaller somehow, the wilderness beyond our windows vast and threatening. We were in the middle of a card game when we heard it, 3 loud, deliberate knocks on the front door. Not frantic, not rapid, just knock, knock, knock. We all froze, cards in hand. Maybe a branch, Jess suggested, but her voice had lost its usual confidence. Nate stood up and grabbed a flashlight. Probably someone from a nearby cabin checking if we're okay with the power out. I followed him to the door, heart pounding. He pulled it open, shining the flashlight out into the darkness. There was no one there, just swirling snow and the night beyond. But there, in the fresh snow on the porch, were footprints, human footprints, leading up to the door, then turning and heading back toward the forest. Nate quickly shut and locked the door. Okay, that's weird. Jess had joined us by then. Maybe someone's lost? Should we call for them? I shook my head. It doesn't make sense. Why knock and leave? We decided to stick together in the main room for the night. Nate stoked the fire while Jess and I dragged mattresses and blankets downstairs. None of us wanted to admit how scared we were, but we all kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see a face staring back. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling and Jess's soft breathing from the mattress next to mine. I woke up to Nate shaking me. Morning light filtered through the windows, and I could see the storm had finally passed. Nate's face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. "Jess is gone," he said. I sat up, disoriented. "What do you mean, gone?" "She's not here. Her bed's empty, and I've checked the whole cabin." I looked over at Jess's mattress. The blankets were thrown back, but her boots were still by the door. Her coat still hung on the hook. Her phone sat on the side table where she'd left it the night before. We called her name, searched every room, the porch, the immediate surroundings. Nothing. The fresh snow outside was undisturbed except for a single set of small footprints, Jess's size, leading away from the cabin and into the forest. No shoes, no coat, just footprints in the snow. "We have to follow them," I said, already pulling on my boots. Nate nodded, grabbing his coat. "I'll get the emergency kit." We followed her tracks into the woods. They were perfectly spaced, like she'd been walking normally, not running or being dragged. That somehow made it worse. Why would she walk into the forest in the middle of the night, in her socks, when it was well below freezing? The footprints led us deeper into the trees, winding between trunks, always in a straight line away from the cabin. After about 15 minutes of walking, we reached a small clearing. The footprints crossed the open space and then stopped. Just stopped in the middle of the clearing, as if Jess had simply vanished into thin air. "This doesn't make sense," Nate said, his breath visible in the cold. "People don't just disappear." That's when I spotted it. A splash of color half buried in the snow at the edge of the clearing. I moved closer and felt my stomach drop. It was Jess's blue scarf, the one her grandmother had made, partially covered by fresh snow. I reached down to pick it up, and my fingers came away wet. Not with melted snow, but with something darker. Blood. The scarf was soaked with it. Nate saw it too, and his face went completely white. "We need to get help, now." We ran back to the cabin, grabbed our phones, desperately searching for a signal. Nothing. The landline was dead too, probably from the storm. The nearest town was 30 miles away, down mountain roads that might not even be plowed yet. "The emergency radio," Nate said suddenly, rummaging through a cabinet. "Uncle Rob keeps one here." He found it, and after some static, managed to reach emergency services. They told us to stay put. A search and rescue team would be dispatched. But with the road conditions, it could take hours. Those were the longest hours of my life. We took turns checking outside, hoping Jess would somehow reappear, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had she sleepwalked, been lured out somehow? None of the explanations fit. The search and rescue team arrived that afternoon with a sheriff's deputy. They took our statements, examined the footprints, and organized a grid search of the surrounding forest. They found nothing, no additional footprints, no signs of struggle, no blood trail. Just Jess's tracks stopping in that clearing and her bloody scarf. By evening, more officers had arrived and the search expanded. Dogs were brought in, but they acted strangely, whining and refusing to follow any scent past the clearing. The deputy suggested we leave. They'd continue the search, and we were clearly in shock. We packed our things in a daze. As we were loading the car, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The footprints from the night before, the ones that had approached our door when we heard the knocking, were gone. Completely gone. Filled in with fresh snow, even though there had been no new snowfall since the storm cleared. The drive back was silent. What could we say? Our friend had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only bloody evidence and impossible footprints. The investigation dragged on for months. They combed those woods, interviewed everyone within a 50-mile radius, checked Jess's phone records and bank accounts for any clue. Nothing. It was as if she'd stepped out of our world entirely. They found no DNA on the scarf except Jess's. No animal tracks, no evidence of any other human presence. Just those footprints that led nowhere and stopped. Her parents still call me sometimes. They try not to, but I can hear the desperate hope in their voices, wondering if I've remembered some detail that might explain what happened to their daughter. I have nothing to give them. Nate moved across the country 6 months after it happened. We barely speak now. I think we remind each other too much of that night, of our failure to protect her. I haven't been back to the mountains since. I can't stand the sight of snow anymore, or the sound of wind through trees. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear 3 knocks at my door, but when I check, there's never anyone there. I don't know what happened to Jess in those woods. Logic tells me there must be an explanation. A person doesn't just vanish without a trace. But I was there. I saw the footprints that led nowhere. I held that blood-soaked scarf in my hands, and sometimes, when I'm on the edge of sleep, I swear I can hear her laugh, distant but clear, as if she's still out there somewhere waiting for us to find her. I still can't sleep with the lights off, even after all this time. It's been 2 years since we left that house, but I swear sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and smell that same acrid smoke lingering in the air. We never wanted to move to Ashwood Lane. It wasn't our first choice, or even our 5th. But with Owen's pay cut and the twins starting kindergarten, we needed to downsize fast. The real estate market was brutal, and the house on Ashwood Lane was significantly under market value. Looking back, I should have questioned why. The first time we toured it, I felt uneasy. The realtor kept emphasizing the historic charm of the 1930s build, but all I could focus on was how the floorboards seemed to groan under our weight, how the air felt thick and stale despite the open windows. I remember Lily, our 8-year-old, tugging at my sleeve halfway through the tour, whispering, "Mommy, who's that man upstairs?" When I asked what she meant, she just pointed at the ceiling and said, "He's watching us." I dismissed it as her imagination. Kids say weird stuff all the time, right? We moved in on December 28th. The timing was terrible, right between Christmas and New Year's, but the lease on our apartment was up, and we couldn't afford to pay for both places. The moving process was exhausting. By evening, we'd managed to set up the beds and unpack the kitchen essentials, but everything else remained in boxes stacked throughout the house. That first night, I blamed my uneasiness on the stress of moving and being in an unfamiliar place. The house made so many noises, creaking, settling, the old pipes rattling whenever someone used the bathroom. Owen fell asleep instantly, but I lay awake until nearly 3 a.m., listening to the house breathe. New Year's Eve, we decided to drive to my sister's place about an hour away. The kids were cranky from the move, and we all needed a break from unpacking. It felt good to be around family, to temporarily forget about the strange vibes of our new home. We ended up staying later than planned. The kids fell asleep on my sister's couch, and we didn't get back to Ashwood Lane until after 2 a.m. That's when things started to get weird. As I carried Lily to her bedroom, I realized her pink hoodie, the one she'd been wearing earlier that day, was missing. I distinctly remembered her wearing it at my sister's house, but it wasn't on her now, and it wasn't in the car. I figured she must have left it at my sister's and made a mental note to call about it the next day. The following morning, Owen was the first one up. I heard him call my name from the hallway, his voice tense in a way that immediately made my stomach knot. When I walked out of our bedroom, he was standing in the middle of the hallway, pointing at the floor. There, perfectly laid out, as if someone had just placed it there, was Lily's pink hoodie. "Did you find this last night?" he asked. I shook my head. No, it wasn't there when we came home. We both stood there staring at the hoodie. It looked wrong somehow. When I picked it up, I noticed it was slightly damp, even though it hadn't been raining. The fabric smelled musty, like it had been stored in a damp basement for weeks, not hours. "Maybe one of the kids brought it in this morning?" Owen suggested, but we both knew they were still asleep, and there was no way Lily had left it at my sister's and somehow retrieved it overnight. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd overlooked it in the dark when we came home. Maybe it had fallen out of the car and someone had placed it there. But deep down, I knew something was off. That whole day, the house felt different. The air seemed heavier, almost oppressive. While unpacking boxes in the living room, I kept thinking I heard footsteps overhead, even though the kids were playing in the backyard and Owen was installing shelves in the garage. Several times I called out, thinking maybe one of the kids had come inside, but there was never an answer. By evening, I'd convinced myself it was just the unfamiliar sounds of an old house settling. We had dinner, watched a movie, put the kids to bed. Normal family stuff. But as I was doing the dishes, I noticed all the cabinet doors in the kitchen were open, every single one. I was positive I'd closed them after putting away the dishes earlier. When I mentioned it to Owen, he just shrugged. "You probably forgot. We're all exhausted from the move." But I knew I hadn't forgotten. And that night, lying in bed, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the ceiling above our bedroom. There wasn't supposed to be anything up there except the attic, which was just storage space, not a walkable floor. "Owen," I whispered, shaking him awake. "Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment, then sat bolt upright. The footsteps were unmistakable now. Thump, 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 directly overhead. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his phone for a flashlight. I wanted to tell him not to go, that whatever was up there wasn't something we wanted to find, but I stayed silent, huddled under the blankets. 10 minutes later, he returned, looking confused. "Nothing," he said. "The attic's empty except for some old junk the previous owners left behind, and the floor up there is covered in dust. No footprints at all." "But we both heard it," I insisted. "Old houses make weird noises," he said, but I could tell he was unsettled too. The next day, things escalated. The twins complained that someone had moved their toys while they were at school. Lily said she kept hearing whispering coming from her closet, and I found muddy footprints tracking through the hallway. Adult-sized prints, too big to belong to any of our family members, despite the fact that no one had been outside in the mud. The footprints were the tipping point for Owen. He finally admitted something strange was happening, though he still tried to find logical explanations. Maybe someone had a key to the house? Maybe there was a squatter hiding somewhere? He checked every closet, every crawl space, even went back up to the attic with a better flashlight. Nothing. That night, we were sitting at the dinner table when we all heard it at once. Heavy footsteps directly above us, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. Not the random creaks of a settling house, but deliberate, rhythmic steps. The kids froze, their eyes wide with fear. Owen jumped up from the table and ran upstairs, but again found nothing. When he came back down, his face was pale. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Do you smell that?" I did. A sharp, acrid smell of smoke, like something burning. We checked the stove, the outlets, the furnace. Nothing. The smoke detectors weren't going off, but the smell was undeniable, hanging in the air like an invisible cloud. That night, none of us wanted to sleep alone. We piled into the master bedroom, the kids on a makeshift pallet on the floor, Owen and I in our bed. I don't think any of us slept much. The footsteps continued intermittently throughout the night, sometimes overhead, sometimes in the hallway outside our locked bedroom door. And the smell of smoke grew stronger, making my eyes water and my throat burn. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, around 3 a.m., we heard a tremendous crash from downstairs. Owen grabbed the baseball bat we'd hastily placed by the bed and crept downstairs, while I huddled with the terrified kids. When he called for me, his voice was shaking. I found him standing in the living room, staring at the scene before us. The coffee table had been flipped over, a vase shattered across the floor, and the couch cushions thrown against the far wall. It looked like someone had ransacked the room in a fit of rage. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. There, on the wall above the couch, clearly illuminated in the beam of Owen's flashlight, were what looked like scorch marks, black, sooty streaks that hadn't been there when we'd gone to bed. And as we stood there, frozen in horror, I swear I heard a low chuckle coming from the darkened kitchen. We didn't even discuss it. Owen simply said, "Pack a bag, we're leaving, now." Within 20 minutes, we had thrown some essential clothes and toiletries into suitcases, bundled the still crying kids into the car, and were speeding away from Ashwood Lane in the pre-dawn darkness. We went straight to my sister's place in the city, showing up on her doorstep at 5 a.m. with wild eyes and incoherent explanations. Over the next few days, Owen went back to the house alone to retrieve more of our things. He never stayed longer than necessary, always returning looking shaken. He said the house felt different each time he went back, sometimes oppressively silent, sometimes filled with indistinct whispers that seemed to follow him from room to room. Once, he found all the framed family photos we'd left behind turned face down. Another time, he discovered Lily's stuffed animals arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of her bedroom floor. We tried to talk to the neighbors about the house to see if anyone else had experienced anything strange, but they were oddly evasive. Most claimed they didn't know much about the previous owners or the house's history. One elderly woman across the street just shook her head and hurried inside when Owen approached her. The only person who gave us anything was the teenage son of the neighbors directly next door. When Owen ran into him while retrieving our mail, the kid looked around nervously and said, "You guys moved out quick, huh?" When Owen mentioned the strange occurrences, the teen's face paled. "Yeah, the family before you left suddenly too, and the ones before them." When Owen pressed for details, the kid just shrugged and said, "It's not my place to say, man." before hurrying away. We broke our lease, of course, lost our security deposit and paid a penalty, but it was worth it to be free of that place. We found a small apartment back in the city, cramped compared to the house, but wonderfully, gloriously normal. About 3 weeks after we left, Owen got a call from a co-worker who lived in the area around Ashwood Lane. Apparently, even though the house was now empty, neighbors were still complaining about strange noises coming from it at night. Lights turning on and off when no one was there. The smell of smoke drifting from the open windows. Someone even called the fire department once, convinced the place was burning down, only for the firefighters to find nothing but cold, empty rooms. I've tried to put it all behind us, to convince myself there must be rational explanations for everything we experienced. Maybe there was a gas leak causing hallucinations. Maybe the house had structural issues that explained the noises. Maybe someone was messing with us, though I can't imagine how or why. But then I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, the memory of those footsteps echoing in my ears. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, I catch that faint whiff of acrid smoke just for a second before it dissipates. The kids still have nightmares. Lily still refuses to wear anything pink. And sometimes, when Owen thinks I'm not looking, I catch him staring off into space with this haunted expression, like he's listening for something the rest of us can't hear. I don't know what was in that house on Ashwood Lane. I don't want to know. All I know is that some places hold on to things, memories, emotions, maybe even people, long after they should have faded away. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, those things notice you too. I still haven't slept properly since getting back from what was supposed to be my relaxing winter getaway. I'm writing this down because I need someone to hear what happened, even if no one believes me. Maybe someone else has seen it too. 3 weeks ago, I decided I needed to get away from everything. Work had been crushing me for months. My apartment felt like it was closing in on me, and I just couldn't handle another day of car horns and neighbor noise. I found this cabin online. Nothing fancy, just a small place on the edge of a frozen lake in northern Minnesota, miles from the nearest town. The listing mentioned true isolation and reconnect with nature, which sounded exactly like what I needed. The cabin owner was this old guy named Frank, who barely said 10 words when handing over the keys. Just pointed at a crude map showing the trails around the property, mumbled something about the weather forecast, and told me the generator was full of gas. I remember him looking at Scout and Bramble in the back of my SUV and saying, "Good you brought them. Nights get lonely out here." Then he was gone in his beat-up truck. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. The cabin was basic but cozy, a main room with a wood stove, small kitchen area, a bathroom with an actual shower, thank God, and a loft bedroom. The windows looked out over the frozen lake, and the whole place was surrounded by pine forest that seemed to go on forever. I'd wake up early, make coffee on the wood stove, and watch the sunrise reflect off the snow, while Scout and Bramble pressed their noses against the glass, eager to get outside. We'd spend mornings hiking the trails. Scout, my 3-year-old German shepherd, would bound ahead, occasionally coming back to check on us, while Bramble, my older border collie mix, stayed closer, always keeping me in sight. In the afternoons, I tried ice fishing. I'm no expert, but Frank had left basic equipment and instructions. There's something weirdly calming about sitting on a bucket on a frozen lake, surrounded by nothing but white. The dogs would play nearby, digging in snowdrifts and chasing each other. By evening, we'd be back in the cabin, me reading by lantern light while both dogs snored in front of the wood stove. I slept better those first 2 nights than I had in months. Then came the third day. I woke up to heavy cloud cover, the kind that makes the whole world look flat and gray. The temperature had dropped overnight, and when I opened the door to let the dogs out for their morning pee, the cold hit like a slap. It was the kind of bitter cold that makes your nose hairs freeze instantly. We set out on a trail I hadn't tried yet, one that looped through denser forest before coming back around to the lake. About a mile in, I realized something felt off. It took me a minute to figure out what was wrong. There was absolutely no sound, no birds, no rustling, nothing. Just complete silence except for our footsteps crunching in the snow. I'm from the city, so I'm not used to forest sounds, but even I knew this wasn't normal. Even in winter you should hear something. Birds, small animals, the wind in the trees, but there was nothing. Just dead silence. Then Scout stopped. He just froze mid-step, one paw raised, his entire body rigid. His ears were forward, and he was staring intensely into the trees to our right. I followed his gaze but couldn't see anything unusual, just more trees and snow. Bramble moved close to my leg, pressing against me so hard I almost lost my balance. She made this low, whining sound I'd never heard from her before. "What is it, guys?" I whispered, not even sure why I was whispering. Scout didn't move, didn't even seem to be breathing. Bramble's whining got louder. I felt the hair on my arms stand up despite my heavy coat. Something was watching us. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I felt it, like when you know someone's staring at you from across a room. "Come on," I said, tugging gently on Bramble's leash. "Let's head back." Scout wouldn't move at first. I had to call him 3 times, and when he finally turned, he kept looking back over his shoulder. We didn't walk back. We practically jogged. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just deer or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Still, by the time we got back to the cabin, I'd almost convinced myself I was just being a city person, freaked out by actual nature. I decided ice fishing might calm my nerves. I wish I'd just stayed inside. The lake seemed different that day, quieter if that was possible. The ice felt thicker under my boots, but also somehow, I don't know how to describe it, less solid, like it was thick but soft at the same time, if that makes any sense. I drilled a new hole about 50 yards from shore, set up my little folding stool, and dropped my line. I'd been sitting there maybe half an hour when I felt a tug. It wasn't the quick jerk of the small perch I'd caught the day before, but a slow, steady pull. I started reeling it in, and it felt heavy. For a second I got excited thinking I'd caught something decent-sized. When I pulled it up through the hole, I almost fell backward off my stool. It was a fish, but wrong in every possible way. It was pale, not silver like a normal fish, but a sickly translucent white, and big, maybe 15 inches long. But what made me nearly puke was its skin. It seemed to be moving, like there were worms or something writhing underneath, visible through the almost see-through flesh. Its eyes were milky white, completely lifeless, yet it was still gasping and twisting on my line. The worst part was when it turned those blind eyes toward me. I swear it looked right at me, even though it couldn't possibly see. Its mouth opened wider than should be possible, showing teeth that fish shouldn't have, sharp and too numerous, arranged in rows that went deep into its throat. I panicked, yanking the hook out so roughly that my hand slipped and scraped against those teeth. I pushed the thing back through the hole with my boot, not even caring about proper catch and release. It slid back into the water with a sound like wet cloth tearing. I grabbed my gear and practically ran back to shore, where Scout and Bramble were waiting. They both seemed agitated, pacing back and forth at the shoreline. On the walk back to the cabin, I noticed my cut hand was burning way more than it should. When I got inside and washed it, the water in the sink turned a weird grayish color. By dusk, the wind had picked up, howling around the cabin's corners and making the whole place creak. The weather forecast had mentioned a possible storm, but this felt different, more targeted somehow, like the wind was trying to find a way in. I couldn't stop thinking about that fish. In my 20-plus years of occasional fishing trips with my dad and uncles, I'd never seen anything remotely like it. I tried Googling it, but of course there was no cell service and the cabin didn't have Wi-Fi. The owner's manual mentioned a satellite phone for emergencies, but it was just for calling out, not internet. I fed the dogs early and made myself a basic dinner, though I barely touched it. My hand had stopped burning but was now numb around the cut, with weird red lines spreading outward. I poured a generous amount of whiskey from the bottle I'd brought and tried to lose myself in my book but couldn't focus. The dogs seemed unsettled too. Instead of their usual evening sprawl by the fire, they kept pacing, occasionally stopping to stare at the walls or the door. Around 10 p.m., I finally gave up on reading and decided to try to sleep, hoping things would seem more normal in the morning. I must have dozed off because I jerked awake to Scout's frantic barking. The clock read 12:17 a.m. Outside, the wind had died completely, leaving an eerie silence broken only by Scout's barks and Bramble's high-pitched whines. They were both at the door, Scout barking like I'd never heard before, not his warning bark for strangers, but something more primal and fearful. I got up, grabbing the heavy flashlight I kept by the bed. "What is it, guys?" My voice sounded thin in the quiet cabin. Scout responded by barking even more frantically, scratching at the door. I hesitated, then moved closer. There was a small window next to the door, and I angled myself to look out without getting too close. The full moon had emerged from behind the clouds, illuminating the clearing in front of the cabin with pale blue light. The snow looked almost fluorescent in the moonlight, and against it I could clearly see tracks. Not deer tracks, not bear tracks, not anything I recognized. They were huge, each impression maybe 2 feet long, with what looked like long, splayed toes or fingers. 5 of them on each print, spread wide, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. They came from the forest, circled the cabin completely, and then led back toward the trees. But they didn't look like they'd been made by anything walking on 4 legs. The pattern was all wrong. They looked like they'd been made by something moving erratically, sometimes close together, sometimes far apart, sometimes deeper on one side, like whatever made them had been leaning or dragging something. As I stood there, frozen in horror, I heard it. A soft scraping sound from the roof. Then a thud, like something heavy shifting position. Scout went ballistic, jumping up at the door, while Bramble cowered behind my legs, trembling violently. The scraping continued, moving slowly across the roof toward the chimney, then stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, there was complete silence. I didn't breathe. The dogs froze. Then came a sound that still wakes me up at night, a low, wet breathing sound coming down the chimney. It wasn't the wind. It was something alive, something big, breathing in long, ragged pulls of air that sounded like they were bubbling through liquid. Then it moved again, back across the roof, and I heard a heavy thump as if it had jumped down. The flashlight shook in my hand as I moved back to the window. In the moonlight, I could see new tracks being formed in the snow, one after another, circling the cabin again. Whatever was making them was just outside my line of sight. The dogs were going crazy now. Scout lunging at the door like he wanted to tear through it, Bramble pressed so hard against my legs, I thought she'd push me over. Then came the worst sound yet, a slow, deliberate scratching at the door. Not frantic like an animal trying to get in, but methodical. 3 long, slow scrapes, pause, then 3 more, like it was testing the strength of the wood, or letting me know it knew exactly where I was. I backed away, dragging Bramble with me, and called Scout. For once, he listened immediately, retreating to my side, his hackles raised so high he barely looked like the same dog. We huddled in the furthest corner of the cabin, me holding the flashlight like a weapon. The dogs pressed against me, all of us staring at the door. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped, and I heard those heavy footsteps moving away, back toward the forest. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat there with the dogs, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin settling. Just before dawn, exhaustion must have taken over because I jolted awake to gray morning light filtering through the windows. The dogs were still pressed against me, but they seemed calmer. No barking, no whining, just watching the door warily. I waited until full daylight before I worked up the courage to look outside. The tracks were still there, clear in the fresh snow. They circled the cabin multiple times, and now I could see claw marks gouged into the snow, as if whatever made them had been dragging its claws along the ground. And there, on the porch, was a dark smear that looked horribly like blood. I didn't wait to find out what might come back that night. I packed our stuff in record time, not even bothering to clean up properly. Just threw everything in bags, got the dogs in the car, and got the hell out of there. I left the key under the mat with a note saying there was a family emergency. The whole drive back to the city, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. The dogs slept the entire way, completely exhausted. It's been 3 weeks, and I still haven't been able to explain what happened. I tried researching local wildlife, thinking maybe it was a bear or moose behaving strangely, but nothing matches those tracks or that breathing sound. I called Frank once I got back to tell him I'd left early, and he just grunted and said, "Happens sometimes, especially when the lake freezes that deep." When I tried to ask what he meant, he changed the subject and hurried to end the call. The cut on my hand healed, but left a weird silvery scar that sometimes feels cold to the touch, even when the rest of me is warm. Scout and Bramble seem back to normal, but they both still stare intensely at our apartment door sometimes, for no reason I can figure out. I don't know what was out there in the snow. I don't want to know. But sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I hear that wet, ragged breathing, and I wonder if whatever it was followed me home after all. I still couldn't tell you why I gave Caleb my real name. That was my first mistake. It's been 7 years since that week at Pinewood Lodge, and I still sleep with my curtains closed and check my locks twice before bed. My roommates think I'm just cautious. They don't know the real reason. No one does except my family, and we don't talk about it anymore. I was 16 when my parents dragged me on that family bonding ski trip. I fought it like hell, leaving my friends for a week to freeze my ass off in the mountains with spotty cell service wasn't exactly my idea of winter break. My little brother was the only one excited, practically bouncing off the walls about snowboarding. Mom and Dad had this whole speech about disconnecting from technology and reconnecting as a family. Whatever. The 4-hour drive to Pinewood Lodge was torture. My phone died halfway there, and I spent the rest of the trip staring out the window as the suburbs gave way to dense forests. By the time we pulled into the lodge's parking lot, everything was covered in at least 3 feet of snow. It was late afternoon, already getting dark because winter sucks like that, and the temperature was in the single digits. I'll admit, the lodge itself was nicer than I expected. It looked like something off a Christmas card. This massive log cabin with smoke curling from stone chimneys, yellow lights spilling from the windows. Inside smelled like pine, cinnamon, and wood smoke. The lobby had this enormous fireplace with actual burning logs, not the gas kind, and worn leather sofas that looked like they'd been there forever. After check-in, we hauled our stuff up to our rooms on the second floor. Mom and Dad had one room, and I was sharing with my brother, which meant listening to him talk about snowboarding tricks until he passed out every night. The room was basic: 2 twin beds with thick quilts, knotty pine furniture, and a bathroom with weak water pressure. The window looked out over the main entrance and the mountains beyond. That first evening, we had dinner in the lodge's dining hall. Long wooden tables, exposed beams overhead, and these antique-looking lanterns that gave everything this warm glow. It was packed with families, all looking way too happy about being stuck in the mountains together. My parents were chatting with some couple about trail conditions while my brother inhaled his burger. I was picking at my fries when I felt someone staring. He was sitting alone at the end of one of the tables, maybe 18 or 19, dark hair falling over his forehead, pale skin. He wasn't dressed like everyone else in their bright North Face jackets and snow pants, just jeans and this worn gray sweater. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He smiled. Not a normal smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. I looked down at my plate, uncomfortable. 10 minutes later, he was suddenly in the empty seat across from me. "They force you to come too?" he asked. His voice was soft but intense. Up close, his eyes were this unsettling pale blue, almost colorless. "Yeah," I said, surprised by his directness. Not exactly my idea of fun. "I'm Caleb," he said, extending his hand across the table. His fingers were long, nails bitten down to the quick. I hesitated, then shook it. His hand was ice cold. "I'm Jamie," I replied, instantly regretting giving my real name. "I hate the cold, too," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "But there's something about this place. It gets under your skin after a while." My brother kicked me under the table, giving me a "who's this weirdo" look. I shrugged. "How long are you staying?" Caleb asked, ignoring my brother completely. "A week. We just got here today." He nodded slowly. "Me too. A week. Maybe we can keep each other company." Before I could respond, he stood up abruptly. "See you around, Jamie." The way he said my name made my skin crawl. He walked away without looking back. "Creepy," my brother muttered. I laughed it off, but something about Caleb made me uneasy. I told myself he was just socially awkward. God knows I wasn't winning any personality contests either at 16. The next morning I dragged myself to breakfast. My family was already halfway through their meal when I got there. As I filled my plate at the buffet, I felt that same sensation of being watched. Caleb was sitting alone again, same spot as last night, staring at me over his coffee mug. He raised it slightly, like a toast, when I looked over. I sat with my family and tried to ignore him, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. When we were leaving, he suddenly appeared at my side. "Going skiing today?" he asked, falling into step beside me. "Snowboarding," I corrected. "My parents are making me." "I'll join you," he said. Not asking, telling. I didn't know how to say no without being rude, so I just shrugged. "Whatever. We're heading out in like an hour." He smiled that same empty smile. "I'll find you." And he did. Somehow he knew exactly which lift we were taking, which runs we were doing. My parents thought he was just some kid I'd made friends with, and my brother was too busy showing off to care. Caleb stayed close to me all day, always within arm's reach, talking about random things. how long he'd been coming to the lodge, his favorite trails, how the snow was different this year. I noticed he never talked about home or school or family. When I asked, he'd change the subject. By the end of the day, my unease had grown into something closer to dread. Something was off about Caleb, but I couldn't put my finger on it. That night at dinner, I deliberately sat between my parents, hoping to avoid him. It worked. He stayed at his usual table, watching. When we got back to our room, there was a chocolate bar on my pillow. Not the kind the lodge gives out. A specific brand I'd mentioned I liked during our day on the slopes. "Did you put this here?" I asked my brother. He shook his head, already absorbed in his phone. I looked at the candy for a long time before throwing it in the trash. The next day was more of the same. Caleb finding us wherever we went, staying close to me. Those pale eyes always watching. I started making excuses to stay near my parents. At dinner I found a hand-knitted scarf draped over my chair, navy blue with gray stripes. When I picked it up, Caleb was watching from across the room, that same empty smile on his face. "Where'd you get that?" Mom asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "It was just here." "Maybe you have a secret admirer," she teased. I left the scarf on the chair when we finished eating. That night I woke up around 3 a.m., not sure why. The room was freezing cold, much colder than it should have been with the heater running. My brother was snoring in the other bed. I was about to roll over when I noticed something on the windowsill, a small wooden carving of a deer about the size of my palm. I definitely hadn't seen it when we went to bed. I got up, heart pounding, and went to the window. The carving was sitting on the inside sill, but our room was on the second floor. Outside, the snow beneath our window was pristine, untouched. No footprints, no ladder marks, nothing to show how someone could have reached our window. I stood there for a long time, staring at the carving, before putting it in my suitcase. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I told my parents I was sick and stayed in the lodge while they went skiing. I spent the day in the common areas, always surrounded by other guests. No sign of Caleb until dinner, when he appeared at our table, uninvited. "Missed you on the slopes today," he said, staring at me intensely. "Wasn't feeling well," I muttered, not meeting his eyes. "I made something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. My dad interrupted, asking Caleb about himself, probably sensing my discomfort. Caleb answered vaguely, keeping his eyes on me the whole time. He left without showing me what was in his pocket. That night I made my brother switch beds so I could sleep farther from the window. I was exhausted and fell asleep quickly despite my anxiety. I woke to a soft tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but it continued. Insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I opened my eyes and froze. The tapping was coming from the window. I turned my head slowly. Through the thin curtains I could see a silhouette, a person, standing outside our second-story window. The moonlight was bright enough that when they pressed closer to the glass, I could make out Caleb's face, that empty smile stretched across it. I screamed. My brother woke up, confused, as I scrambled out of bed and hit the light switch. My parents burst in from their connecting room. By the time my dad threw open the curtains, there was nothing there, just the vast expanse of snow below, still perfect and untouched in the moonlight. "There was someone at the window," I insisted, shaking. "It was Caleb." Dad looked skeptical. "Honey, we're on the second floor. There's no balcony, no ledge, not even footprints in the snow down there." "I know what I saw," I said, wrapping my arms around myself. "He was there." They checked the locks, looked under the beds, in the closet, bathroom. Nothing. Eventually, they chalked it up to a nightmare and went back to bed. My brother called me crazy and rolled over, asleep again within minutes. I sat up the rest of the night, staring at the window, the desk lamp burning brightly beside me. At breakfast the next morning, Caleb acted completely normal, like he hadn't been outside my window in the middle of the night. He sat down across from me while my family was getting food. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, that same intensity in his pale eyes. "You know I didn't," I said quietly. "What were you doing outside my window?" He tilted his head, confused. "What are you talking about? I was in my room all night." "Stop lying," I hissed. "I saw you." He reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled back sharply. "Jamie, I think you had a bad dream. How could I be outside your window? It's on the second floor." My family returned before I could respond. I didn't touch my food, my stomach in knots. After breakfast, I told my parents I wanted to go home. They thought I was overreacting, said we couldn't leave just because I had a nightmare. I didn't push it. I didn't want to sound crazy. That evening, the lodge held a bonfire in the clearing behind the main building. Everyone gathered around, roasting marshmallows, singing songs. I stuck close to my parents, jumping at every sound from the dark woods surrounding us. I hadn't seen Caleb all day, which somehow made me more nervous, not less. As people started drifting back toward the lodge, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I whirled around to find Caleb standing there, holding a small bunch of wilted flowers. "These are for you," he said, thrusting them toward me. They looked like they'd been ripped from some indoor arrangement, browning at the edges. "Leave me alone," I said, loud enough that a few people turned to look. "I don't want your flowers. I don't want anything from you." His face changed then, like a mask slipping. The empty smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and angry. "You don't need to be afraid of me, Jamie. I just want to be close to you." "Get away from me," I said, backing up toward my parents. "You're freaking me out." Something in his eyes shifted. Without warning, he dropped to his knees in the snow and began clawing at his own arm, his nails raking through the sleeve of his sweater, drawing blood. The expression on his face never changed, even as red stained the gray fabric. People rushed over. 2 staff members grabbed him, pulling him to his feet. He didn't resist, just kept staring at me with those pale eyes as they led him away. My parents finally believed me then. We checked out 2 days early, driving home in tense silence. They reported the incident to the lodge management, who only said Caleb was a troubled young man they'd dealt with before. They wouldn't say more, something about privacy policies. I thought it was over when we got home. I was wrong. A week later, a small package arrived at our house, addressed to me. No return address. Inside was the wooden deer carving I'd hidden in my suitcase, the one I'd deliberately left behind at the lodge, and a note written in cramped, spidery handwriting, "You'll never forget me." We called the police. They took the package, filed a report, told us to call if anything else happened. Nothing did, not exactly, but sometimes I swear I see him. A glimpse of dark hair and pale eyes in a crowd. A figure standing across the street when I get home late. That same intense stare through a restaurant window. I've moved 3 times since then, changed my phone number, deleted old social media accounts, created new ones under different names. But that feeling of being watched has never fully gone away. The creepiest part? I looked up Pinewood Lodge last year, curious if they were still in business. Their website had a history page with old photos. One from 1978 caught my eye, a group of guests around a bonfire, like the one we'd attended. In the background, partially hidden in shadow, was a young man with dark hair and pale eyes, wearing a gray sweater. He looked exactly like Caleb, exactly the same. I still have nightmares about that tapping on my window. Tap, tap, tap. And sometimes, on cold winter nights, I swear I hear it for real. That soft, persistent sound against the glass, even though I live on the 6th floor now. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone's out there waiting for me to look. I never do. I've never been able to enjoy winter since it happened. Not the snow, not the holidays, none of it. It's been 3 years, but every time I see a frozen lake or hear someone mention a cabin getaway, my heart starts racing and my palms get sweaty. I'm sharing this because my therapist thinks it might help, but honestly, I don't know if anything will ever make this better. It was January 2020, right after New Year's, when everyone was back at work, but still talking about their holiday plans. I've always been a homebody, especially during winter. Give me a blanket, some hot chocolate, and Netflix, and I'm set. So when Ryan from accounting invited me to his family's cabin for the weekend, my first instinct was to say no. "Come on," he'd said, leaning against my cubicle wall. "It'll be fun. Just a small group, good food, board games, maybe some hiking if the weather's nice." Ryan wasn't exactly a close friend, but we got along well enough at company happy hours. He was charming, always knew what to say to make people laugh. I'd seen him around the office for about 8 months. I was going to decline, but then my mom called that same night. "You need to get out more," she said. "Meet people, have experiences." So when Ryan asked again the next day, I reluctantly agreed. "Great," he'd said, his face lighting up. "My cousin Lucas will be there with his girlfriend Mandy, and my college friends Jake and Emily. 6 people total, so it won't be too crowded." I remember packing that Friday morning before work, throwing in my warmest clothes, a book I'd been meaning to read, and some snacks for the drive. Ryan had offered to pick me up after work since it was on his way, which I appreciated. One less thing to worry about. The drive took about 3 hours. At first, we made small talk about work, music, the usual stuff. Ryan was easy to talk to, asking questions about my family and seeming genuinely interested in my answers. But as we got further from the city, the landscape changing from suburbs to dense forest, I noticed him checking his phone more frequently, texting someone with rapid-fire thumbs. "Everything okay?" I asked after he'd glanced at his phone for the 5th time in as many minutes. Yeah, he said, sliding the phone back into his pocket. "Just Lucas wanting to know when we'll get there. He's eager to start the festivities." I should have paid more attention to the way his voice changed when he said that, slightly higher pitched, a bit too casual. But I was distracted by the scenery. The snow-covered trees were beautiful, and when we turned onto a narrow dirt road, the headlights illuminating nothing but white powder and dark trunks, it looked like something from a postcard. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend, larger than I'd expected, with warm light pouring from the windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Behind it, just visible in the fading light, was a frozen lake stretching out toward the horizon. "Home sweet home," Ryan said as he parked next to 2 other vehicles, a red Jeep and a black SUV. Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled like cooking food. Lucas greeted us first, tall, with the same jawline as Ryan, but darker hair. His girlfriend Mandy was quieter, hanging back while Lucas gave his cousin a bear hug. Jake and Emily were in the kitchen, arguing good-naturedly about the proper way to make a pasta sauce. I felt awkward immediately. It was obvious they all knew each other well, and I was the outsider. Ryan introduced me to everyone, but I could tell they'd been expecting me. There were looks exchanged that I couldn't quite interpret. Still, they were friendly enough, offering me a beer and showing me where I'd be sleeping. A small room off the main living area with a twin bed and a dresser. Dinner was loud and boisterous, with Ryan keeping the conversation flowing. They all had inside jokes that I couldn't follow, references to trips they'd taken together or people they all knew. I smiled and nodded, trying to fit in, but feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Throughout the meal, I kept noticing strange glances between Ryan and Lucas, little nods or raised eyebrows that seemed to carry meaning. At one point, Lucas checked his watch and gave Ryan a pointed look, which Ryan answered with a slight shake of his head. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Jake brought out a bottle of whiskey, and everyone took shots. I'm not much of a drinker, so I just had one, feeling the burn all the way down to my stomach. The windows were black mirrors now, reflecting our small group back at us, with the darkness of the forest pressing in from outside. "We should go down to the lake," Ryan suddenly announced. "It looks amazing at night, all frozen over with the stars reflected on the ice." I didn't want to go. It was cold outside, and I was tired from the drive and the social effort of dinner. But everyone else was getting up, reaching for coats and boots, and I didn't want to be left alone in the cabin. "It's not far," Mandy said to me, noticing my hesitation. It was the first time she'd addressed me directly. "Just down a little path behind the house." So I bundled up and followed them out the back door. The cold hit me like a physical blow, shocking after the warmth of the cabin. Our breath clouded in front of us as Ryan led the way down a narrow path, using his phone as a flashlight. The lake was beautiful, I have to admit. The moon was nearly full, casting a silver light over the frozen surface. Stars were scattered across the clear sky, more than you ever see in the city. In any other circumstances, I would have enjoyed the view. "Look over there," Ryan said, pointing to the far side of the lake. "See that structure? That's the old boathouse. My grandfather built it, but it's falling apart now. We should check it out." Again, I didn't want to go. The ice didn't look that solid to me, and I had no desire to explore a dilapidated building in the middle of the night. But everyone was already moving, following Ryan out onto the ice. "Is this safe?" I asked, hanging back. "Totally," Jake called over his shoulder. "The lake's been frozen solid for weeks. You could drive a truck on this ice." Reluctantly, I stepped onto the lake. The ice creaked slightly under my weight, but held firm. We made our way slowly across, our footsteps crunching in the snow that dusted the surface. The boathouse loomed larger as we approached, a dark, weather-beaten structure that leaned slightly to one side, as if it might collapse at any moment. "Ladies first," Ryan said with a flourish as we reached the door. I hesitated, but Emily pushed past me, ducking through the low doorway. The others followed, and I went in last, not wanting to be left outside alone. The inside of the boathouse was pitch black until Ryan turned on his phone's flashlight again. The beam illuminated rotting wooden walls, a dirt floor, and what looked like old fishing equipment hanging from hooks. The air was damp and musty, with a hint of something else, something unpleasant that I couldn't quite identify. That's when everything changed. I felt a hand grab my arm, hard enough to bruise. I turned to see Jake, his face suddenly serious, all the friendliness gone. Lucas moved to block the door, and Ryan stepped in front of me, his phone light directed at my face, blinding me. "Sorry about this," Ryan said, but he didn't sound sorry at all. "We've got bills to pay." "What?" I managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "What are you talking about?" "Your wallet," Jake said from behind me, his grip tightening. "Phone," jewelry, anything valuable, now. I couldn't believe what was happening. These people, who I'd eaten dinner with less than an hour ago, who'd seemed so normal, were robbing me. "You can't be serious," I said, looking from face to face in the harsh light of Ryan's phone. Emily was expressionless. Lucas looked almost bored, and Ryan was smiling. "Dead serious," he said, "and if you make this difficult, it gets worse for you. We're in the middle of nowhere. No one knows you're here except us." The threat was clear. My hands shaking, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Ryan took it, rifling through it and pocketing the cash, about $200 that I'd brought for the weekend. He tossed the empty wallet on the ground. "Phone," he said, holding out his hand. I gave him my iPhone. He immediately turned it off and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Watch, earrings, anything else?" Jake asked, his breath hot on my neck. "Just this," I said, unclasping my watch, a gift from my parents for my college graduation. Ryan took it, examining it in the light before nodding approvingly. "Nice," he said. "Should get a few hundred for this." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan shrugged. "Like I said, bills to pay, and you're the perfect mark. Single, lives alone, no one expecting you back until Sunday night. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, we'll be long gone." The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. They'd planned this. Ryan had targeted me specifically. "What are you going to do to me?" I asked, hating how my voice trembled. Ryan exchanged a look with Lucas. "That depends on you," he said. "If you cooperate, maybe we just leave you here for a while. Give us time to get away." "In this cold?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. The temperature outside was well below freezing. "Mandy will stay with you," Ryan said, nodding to the quiet girlfriend who hadn't said a word during the whole exchange. "She has a watch. In 2 hours, you can go back to the cabin." 2 hours in a freezing boathouse in the middle of the night. I could feel the cold already seeping through my coat, numbing my fingers and toes. "And if I don't cooperate?" I had to ask, though I was afraid of the answer. Ryan's smile widened, showing teeth. "Then Jake here gets to practice some of the stuff he learned in the army. Trust me, you don't want that." I believed him. "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'll do whatever you want. Smart choice," Ryan said. He looked at Jake. "Tie her hands." Jake pulled a zip tie from his pocket. He'd come prepared and secured my wrists in front of me. It was tight enough to hurt, digging into my skin. 2 hours, Ryan said to Mandy. "Then you can both go back to the cabin. We'll be gone by then." Mandy nodded, her face unreadable in the dim light. Then they left. Ryan, Lucas, Jake, and Emily filing out of the boathouse and back across the frozen lake. I watched through the doorway as their figures grew smaller, the beams of their flashlights bobbing in the darkness until they disappeared into the trees. And then it was just me and Mandy in the cold, dark boathouse. I sank to the floor, my legs no longer able to support me. Shock, fear, and cold were making it hard to think clearly. My wrists ached from the zip tie, and I could feel tears freezing on my cheeks. "Why?" I asked Mandy, who stood by the door watching the empty lake. "Why would you do this to someone?" She turned to look at me, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes too. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know. Not until we got here. Lucas told me it was just going to be a fun weekend with friends." I didn't know whether to believe her. She could easily be lying, playing the sympathetic one to keep me calm. "Then why are you still with them?" Why didn't you stop them?" She laughed bitterly. "You don't know Lucas like I do. He has a temper. And Jake scares me." We fell silent after that. The cold was getting worse, seeping into my bones. I couldn't feel my toes anymore, and my fingers were turning an alarming shade of blue. Mandy huddled in her coat, checking her watch every few minutes. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, Mandy suddenly straightened up. "This is stupid," she said. "We're going to freeze to death out here." She came over to me and, to my shock, pulled out a small pocket knife. For a terrifying moment, I thought she was going to hurt me, but instead, she cut the zip tie around my wrists. "Let's go back to the cabin," she said. "They're probably gone by now anyway, taking whatever valuables they could find." I rubbed my wrists, trying to get the circulation back. "What if they're still there?" "Then we're screwed," she said bluntly. "But we're definitely screwed if we stay here much longer. I can't feel my feet." She had a point. Reluctantly, I got up, wincing as blood rushed back into my numb limbs. Together, we made our way out of the boathouse and back onto the frozen lake. The walk back was excruciating. The wind had picked up, cutting through our clothes like knives. My face was so cold it had gone beyond pain to a strange numbness. Mandy led the way, her head down against the wind, and I followed, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. When we finally reached the cabin, it was dark and silent. Mandy tried the door, unlocked. We stumbled inside, immediately engulfed by blessed warmth. "Hello?" Mandy called, but there was no answer. The cabin was empty. I sank onto the couch, trembling uncontrollably as my body began to warm up. Mandy disappeared into one of the bedrooms and came back with blankets, which she wrapped around both of us. "I'm so sorry," she said again, her voice breaking. "I had no idea they were planning this. Lucas told me you were a friend from work who needed a weekend away. I wanted to be angry at her, to blame her for being part of it, but I was too exhausted, too cold, too shocked to feel anything but relief that we were back in the warm cabin." "Is there a phone?" I asked when I could finally speak without my teeth chattering. "They took my cell." Mandy pointed to an old landline in the kitchen. "It works. I saw Ryan use it earlier when the cell reception was bad." I staggered to the phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. When the operator answered, I could barely get the words out through my sobs. "I've been robbed," I said, "at a cabin on... I don't even know where we are." Mandy provided the address, and I repeated it to the operator. They said they'd send officers right away, but it would take at least 30 minutes for them to reach us, given our remote location. Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. Mandy and I sat in silence, wrapped in our blankets, jumping at every creak of the old cabin. What if they came back? What if they'd forgotten something? What if this was all part of their plan, to let us think we'd escaped, only to return and find us waiting helplessly? But they didn't come back. The police arrived, 2 officers in a patrol car, their faces grim as we told our story. They searched the cabin and confirmed what we already knew. Ryan and the others were long gone, along with my belongings and anything valuable they could grab from the cabin. "They took their vehicles?" one officer asked. I nodded. "There was a red Jeep and a black SUV when we arrived." The officer made a note. "We'll put out an alert for those vehicles. Did you get license plate numbers?" I hadn't, of course. I'd been too busy trying to fit in, too oblivious to what was coming to pay attention to such details. The police offered to take us to the station, and I accepted gratefully. Mandy hesitated, but ultimately came too. She gave her statement separately from mine, and I never heard what she told them. For all I know, she could have been in on it the whole time, playing the part of the innocent girlfriend to keep me compliant. The next few days were a blur of police reports, calls to my bank to freeze my accounts, arranging for a new phone and ID. My parents drove 3 hours to pick me up from the police station, my mom crying when she saw the bruises on my wrists from the zip tie. They did find the vehicles, abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in a town about 50 miles away. But Ryan, Lucas, Jake, and Emily had vanished. The cabin, it turned out, belonged to a real estate company that rented it out for vacation stays. Ryan had paid for it with a stolen credit card. The police checked Ryan's employment information, but it was all fake. The person who had worked with me for 8 months, who I'd shared lunch breaks with and made small talk with at the coffee machine, didn't actually exist. His references were fake, his background check forged. How he'd managed to get hired was a whole separate investigation. It's been 3 years now, and they've never caught any of them. Sometimes I think I see Ryan in a crowd, or Lucas in a grocery store, and my heart stops until I realize it's just someone who looks vaguely similar. I've moved to a different city, changed jobs, deleted all my social media accounts, but I still don't feel safe. Winter is the worst. Every snowfall reminds me of that night, of the frozen lake and the boathouse and the cold that seeped into my bones. I can't look at cabins in travel brochures without feeling sick, and I never ever accept invitations from coworkers I don't know well. Because the scariest part wasn't the robbery, or the cold, or even the threats. It was realizing that someone I thought I knew, someone I'd trusted enough to get into a car with and drive to a remote location, had been lying the entire time, had been watching me, planning, waiting for the right moment, and I never saw it coming. I don't even know where to start with this. I haven't been able to sleep properly for weeks now. I'm writing this at 3:42 a.m. because I just heard the knocking again, and I can't bring myself to look at my bedroom door. My hands are shaking as I type this, but I need to get this out somewhere. Maybe someone has dealt with something similar and can help me make sense of what happened. 6 weeks ago, I booked a week-long stay at this secluded lodge in the Alps. After pulling 70-hour weeks for almost 3 months straight on this massive project at work, I was completely burned out. My boss actually insisted I take time off. Go somewhere without Wi-Fi, he said. Completely disconnect. I should have just gone to a beach resort like a normal person. But no, I had this romantic idea of an alpine getaway. I found this gorgeous old lodge online, Berghaus Edelweiss, tucked away in a valley with incredible views of the mountains. The photos showed this beautiful wooden building with those classic steep alpine roofs, massive wooden beams, and a stone fireplace that took up an entire wall in the main lobby. Something about it just spoke to me. The travel site mentioned it was family-owned for generations, built in the 1890s, and had been renovated over the years while maintaining its historic charm. I splurged on a third-floor corner room with its own balcony facing the forest. The website promised unparalleled mountain views and perfect solitude. The solitude part really sold me. No meetings, no Slack notifications, no project deadlines. Just me, some books I'd been meaning to read, and nothing but snow and silence. The drive up to the lodge was gorgeous but nerve-wracking. The roads got narrower and steeper, with these hairpin turns that had me white-knuckling the steering wheel of my rental car. When I finally arrived, it was exactly like the pictures. This beautiful wooden structure nestled against the mountainside, smoke curling from the chimney, snow piled high on the roof, and these massive windows glowing with warm light. The first few days were perfect. I'm not exaggerating. They were exactly what I needed. I'd wake up naturally around 8 a.m., no alarm clock, have a leisurely breakfast in the dining room, then head out for a few hours of skiing. The lodge had its own small ski area with a couple of lifts, nothing fancy but perfect for what I wanted. The snow was incredible. Fresh powder every morning. I'd come back around 2 p.m., take a hot shower, and spend the rest of the afternoon either reading in front of the main fireplace downstairs or in the small sitting area on my floor. They served the most amazing hot chocolate I've ever had. Thick, rich, with actual melted chocolate and fresh whipped cream. In the evenings, I'd have dinner in the lodge's restaurant, then read in my room until I fell asleep. What made it even better was that I wasn't on anyone else's schedule. There were other guests, mostly families with kids and a few older couples, but I was completely free to do my own thing. No one asking me what my plans were for the day or trying to coordinate activities. Complete freedom. Looking back, those first 3 days were too perfect, like the universe was setting me up for what came next. On the 4th day, I decided to explore more of the lodge. After dinner, instead of going straight back to my room, I took a different staircase and ended up in a hallway I hadn't been down before. The lodge had these long corridors with creaky wooden floors and walls covered in old black and white photographs, mostly of the lodge itself, the surrounding mountains, and guests from decades past. One photograph in particular caught my eye. It showed a group of skiers from what looked like the 1920s or 30s, judging by their clothing and equipment. About 8 people posed proudly in the snow, their skis planted vertically beside them, with the lodge visible in the background. But what made me stop wasn't the main group. It was a figure standing several yards behind them, partially hidden in the shadows of the trees. This person wasn't dressed like the others. They wore what appeared to be a long, dark coat and had a scarf wrapped around the lower half of their face. Only their eyes were visible, and even in this grainy old photograph, there was something off about them. They seemed to be staring directly at the camera with an intensity that felt almost physical. I actually got goosebumps looking at it. I leaned in closer to see if there was a date or caption, but there wasn't. Just as I was about to continue down the hallway, one of the lodge staff approached me, an older woman who I think worked in housekeeping. "Finding everything okay?" she asked in accented English. "Yes, just looking at the photos," I replied. "This one is interesting. Who's that person in the background?" She glanced at the photograph and frowned slightly. "I don't know, just an old picture." Then she smiled politely and continued down the hallway. Something about her reaction seemed off, but I didn't think much of it at the time. That night things started to get weird. I had gone to bed around 11 p.m. and was just drifting off to sleep when I heard it. A faint but distinct tapping sound coming from the direction of my balcony door. Tap, 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 rhythmic and deliberate. At first I thought it was just a branch hitting the glass, or maybe snow falling from the roof, but it was too regular, too precise. I lay there listening for a few minutes, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the tapping continued. Finally, I got up and turned on the bedside lamp. The tapping immediately stopped. I cautiously approached the balcony door, which had thick curtains drawn across it. My heart was pounding as I reached for the edge of the curtain. I kept reminding myself that my room was on the 3rd floor with a straight drop below my balcony. There couldn't possibly be anyone out there. I pulled the curtain back just a few inches and peered out. There was someone standing on my balcony. I'm not exaggerating when I say my blood turned to ice. There was a man standing there perfectly still, facing the glass door. He wore a long, dark coat, and a scarf was wrapped around the lower half of his face, leaving only his eyes visible, eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural intensity in the darkness. The same figure from the photograph. I stumbled backward, letting the curtain fall closed, and grabbed my phone with shaking hands. I called the front desk, stammering something about someone on my balcony. The night manager sounded concerned and said he'd send someone up immediately. While waiting, I worked up the courage to look again. I pulled back the curtain just slightly, and the balcony was empty. There was no one there. I unlocked the door and stepped out cautiously, the freezing night air hitting me like a slap. The balcony was completely untouched, with a thin layer of fresh snow that showed no footprints whatsoever. Looking over the railing, I saw nothing but pristine snow below. No ladder, no rope, no evidence anyone could have climbed up or down. I was still standing there, confused and shivering, when I heard a knock on my room door. I went back inside, locking the balcony door behind me, and approached the room door. "Who is it?" I called out. No response, just another knock. Something compelled me to look through the peephole. When I did, my heart nearly stopped. Standing in the hallway was the same figure. Dark coat, scarf covering most of his face, eyes burning with that same terrible intensity, staring directly at the peephole as if he knew I was looking. I backed away from the door, nearly tripping over my own feet. This made no sense. How could he have gotten from my balcony to the hallway so quickly? I grabbed my phone again and called the front desk a second time, my voice barely a whisper as I begged them to send help immediately. The knocking continued, steady and patient, as I huddled on the far side of the room. 5 minutes later, I heard multiple footsteps in the hallway and a voice calling my name. When I looked through the peephole again, I saw the night manager and a security guard, but no sign of the figure in the dark coat. I let them in, trying to explain what had happened without sounding completely insane. They searched my room thoroughly, checked the balcony again, and even went up and down the hallway. Nothing. The night manager assured me that there was no way anyone could have accessed my balcony from the outside, and the security footage in the hallway, which I didn't even know existed, showed no one except me entering or leaving my room. They offered to move me to another room, but I declined. The thought of walking through the hallways seemed more terrifying than staying put. The night manager left a walkie-talkie with me, connected directly to security, and promised someone would patrol the floor throughout the night. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the armchair facing both the room door and the balcony door, lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. The rest of the night passed without incident, but as the sun rose, I'd already made up my mind. I was checking out, vacation be damned. I packed my bags quickly and was at the front desk by 7 a.m. The morning receptionist seemed surprised by my early departure but didn't ask questions when I said there was a family emergency. As she processed my checkout, she handed me a folded piece of paper. "This was left for you," she said casually. "Left by whom?" I asked, not touching it. She shrugged. "It was slipped under the front desk door this morning with your room number on it." With a growing sense of dread, I unfolded the paper. It was a copy of the photograph I had been looking at the previous evening. The group of skiers from the 1920s or 30s. But this version was different. The mysterious figure wasn't in the background anymore. He was in the foreground, standing directly in front of the group, staring into the camera. And now I could see his eyes clearly. They weren't just intense. They were completely black, like empty sockets. Written below the image in faded ink were the words, "I see you." I don't remember much about the drive down the mountain. I know I was shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. I drove straight to the airport and changed my flight to the earliest one available, spending an obscene amount on the change fee. That was 6 weeks ago, and I wish I could say everything went back to normal once I got home. It hasn't. 3 times now, I've woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window, the same rhythmic tap, tap, tap that I heard at the lodge. My apartment is on the 6th floor. Last week I heard knocking at my front door at 3 a.m. When I checked the security camera I had installed, there was no one there. And yesterday I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was another copy of that photograph, but in this version, the figure was even closer to the camera, his black eyes seeming to follow me as I moved. The words written below were the same. I see you. I don't know what to do. I've searched online for information about the lodge and strange occurrences there, but found nothing unusual. I even tried calling them to ask about the photograph, but they claimed they had no records of any photos matching my description. The knocking is back now. It's coming from my bedroom door. I know if I look through the peephole, he'll be there, waiting. I don't know what he wants or why he's following me, but I know one thing for certain. Whatever was in that photograph wasn't human, and now it's found me. I'm not looking at the door. I'm not going to look, but the knocking won't stop. I still get nightmares about it, even though it happened 15 years ago. My palms are sweating just trying to type this out, but I need to share what happened. Maybe someone can make sense of it, because I sure as hell can't. Winter of 2008. I was 12, and my parents thought it would be a great idea to rent this cabin in the Rockies for a week. Just the four of us. Me, my little brother Danny, he was 9, and my parents. No internet, barely any cell reception, and definitely no other kids around. My parents called it a digital detox and family bonding time. I called it torture. The cabin was nice enough, I guess, all wooden with this big stone fireplace and those tacky deer head decorations on the walls. But it was literally in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was like 40 minutes away, and we'd driven on this sketchy dirt road for what felt like forever to get there. No neighbors, no nothing. Just trees, snow, and more trees. The first couple days were okay. We did the whole sledding thing, built snowmen, drank hot chocolate, all that winter vacation stuff parents think kids love. Danny was having the time of his life, the little dork, but by day 3, I was climbing the walls with boredom. There's only so many card games you can play before you start contemplating if freezing to death would be more entertaining. That morning, I was looking out the window while my parents made breakfast. The sun was just coming up, making the snow all glittery. That's when I noticed it, a small gap between 2 pine trees about 50 yards from the cabin. It looked like a trail. Mom had mentioned something about a frozen lake nearby, and I figured that might be the way to it. Finally, something to explore. After breakfast, I announced I was going outside to build a snow fort. Mom just reminded me not to go too far and to be back for lunch at noon. Danny immediately jumped up, wanting to come with me, but I shut that down fast. I want to be alone, I told him. He looked crushed, but whatever. I needed space from my annoying little brother. I bundled up in my purple ski jacket, pulled on my boots, and headed outside. The cold hit me immediately, that sharp, nostril-freezing kind of cold that makes your face hurt. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way to the trail I'd spotted. It was definitely a trail. Narrow, but clear enough that someone had used it recently. The trees formed this kind of tunnel above it, branches heavy with snow. I remember thinking it looked like something from a Christmas card. I followed it, excited to have found something interesting to do. The woods were super quiet, that weird winter quiet, where you can hear every twig snap under your feet. My breath made these little clouds in front of my face. I kept walking for maybe 15-20 minutes, the trail winding through the trees. Then suddenly, the trees opened up, and there it was, this massive frozen lake stretching out in front of me. It was breathtaking. The ice was so smooth and clear in some places you could see straight through to the dark water below. The sun reflected off it, making the whole thing sparkle like it was covered in diamonds. I walked out a few feet onto the ice, testing if it would hold me. It did. I stood there for a few minutes, just taking in how beautiful and peaceful it was. That's when I heard it, the crunch of footsteps in snow behind me. I turned around, expecting maybe Danny had followed me after all. But it wasn't Danny. It was a man. Standing right at the edge of the trees where the trail emptied out, he was tall, like really tall, wearing a heavy dark coat that went down to his knees. He had on this dark knit hat pulled low, and I couldn't really see his face clearly. He just stood there, watching me. My stomach instantly knotted up. We were so far from the cabin, and there was no reason for anyone else to be out here. No one knew we were staying at this cabin except the rental company. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then he started walking toward me, not rushing, just this steady, deliberate walk. I remember the sound his boots made on the snow, thump, crunch, getting louder as he got closer. "Kinda dangerous for you to be out here all alone, isn't it?" he said. His voice was deep but weirdly soft at the same time. He had this slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. I tried to keep my voice steady. "My family's right over there," I lied, vaguely gesturing toward the far side of the lake. "My dad's ice fishing." The man's smile widened, showing teeth. "Is that right? Well, why don't we go find them? I'm sure they're worried about you." That's when he lunged forward and grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron, his gloved hand completely encircling my wrist. I remember the pressure of his fingers digging in, how my jacket sleeve twisted. For a split second, I froze. Then my mom's voice popped into my head. She'd always told me if someone ever grabbed me, to scream as loud as I could and fight like hell. So I did. I screamed. Like blood-curdling horror movie scream that hurt my own ears. The sound echoed across the lake, bouncing back at us from the surrounding mountains. The man flinched, just for a second, loosening his grip slightly. That moment was all I needed. I kicked at his shin as hard as I could, then stomped down on his foot. At the same time, I clawed at his hand, raking my nails over the small strip of skin between his glove and coat sleeve. He let go, swearing, and I ran. I didn't look back, didn't think, just ran as fast as I've ever run in my life. Back down that trail, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning from the cold air. I kept expecting to feel his hand on my shoulder at any moment, to be yanked backward. I burst out of the trees and saw the cabin. I've never been so happy to see anything in my entire life. I scrambled up the porch steps, nearly falling, and burst through the door, slamming it behind me. My family was all in the living room. Danny was playing with some toy cars, and my parents were reading on the couch. They all looked up, startled. I was hysterical, crying, gasping for breath, trying to explain what happened. My dad jumped up immediately, grabbing a hatchet we'd used to chop kindling. Mom pulled me and Danny away from the windows, locking the door. Dad called out that he was going to check it out. Mom tried to stop him, saying we should just call the police, but there was no cell service in the cabin. The nearest landline was at the ranger station 40 minutes away. "I'll just follow the tracks," Dad said. "I won't confront him if I see him." He was trying to sound calm, but I could see how scared and angry he was. Mom held me tight while we waited, Danny asking a million questions I couldn't answer. I kept seeing the man's face in my mind, or what little I could see of it. That smile, those eyes. Dad came back about 20 minutes later. His face was weird, confused, concerned. "I followed the tracks," he said. "Yours are clear as day, and there's definitely another set following the same path. They go all the way to the lake." He paused, taking off his gloves. "But that's where it gets strange. The other tracks just stop, right at the edge of the lake, like whoever made them just vanished." "What do you mean they stop?" Mom asked. Dad shook his head. "They don't continue in any direction. They don't double back. They're just gone." We packed up and left that night. Dad called the rental company from the ranger station, making up some family emergency. We drove straight through the night, me in the back seat, jumping at every set of headlights behind us. My parents reported it to the local police once we got home, but nothing ever came of it. They said it was probably just some hiker who got scared when I screamed and ran off another way. That didn't explain the vanishing footprints, but no one seemed too concerned about that detail. For years afterward, I had these vivid nightmares. In them, I'm standing on that frozen lake again, but it's getting dark. I turn around and the man is there, but this time I can see his face clearly, except it's not really a face at all, just a blank, featureless void under that knit hat. I've never gone back to the mountains. I've never gone hiking alone. Even now at 27, the sound of snow crunching under boots makes me break out in a cold sweat. Sometimes I try to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some creepy guy who lived in the woods. Maybe Dad missed something about the tracks. Maybe my memory has twisted things over time. But then I remember the iron grip on my arm, the way his smile never reached his eyes, and how his footprints simply ended at the edge of a frozen lake in the middle of nowhere. And I know, whatever happened that day, it wasn't normal. It wasn't explainable. The weirdest thing. A few years ago, I got curious and looked up that cabin online, thinking maybe I could face my fears or something. But I couldn't find it. The rental company doesn't exist anymore. The road we took doesn't show up on any maps. It's like that whole place disappeared, just like those footprints in the snow. I've never told this story to anyone besides my immediate family. They don't like talking about it either, but I needed to get it out somewhere to see if anyone's experienced anything similar. Because 15 years later, I still find myself looking over my shoulder when I'm alone, half expecting to see a tall figure in a dark coat, watching me with that not quite right smile. I never talk about what happened last winter. I've tried so hard to bury it, move on, and convince myself it wasn't that big a deal. But after what I saw on the news yesterday, I need to get this off my chest. Maybe somebody here will believe me. I was in my final year at Bellwood Cosmetology Academy. December was kicking my ass with finals and portfolio preparations. I'd been struggling with my balayage technique, and my instructor had given me access to the student salon after hours so I could practice. That night, I stayed way later than I meant to. I was working on this mannequin head, trying to get the color gradient perfect. I must have redone it 3 times. When I finally looked at my phone, it was almost 11 p.m., and outside the windows was nothing but swirling snow. I hadn't even noticed the storm rolling in. I started packing up my stuff, dreading the walk home. My apartment was only about a mile away, but in a snowstorm? Shit. I hadn't dressed for it either, just jeans, my favorite chunky knit sweater, and the red wool scarf my grandma had given me for my birthday. I was zipping up my bag when I heard the door to the salon open. My heart jumped into my throat until I recognized Adrian standing there, shaking snow from his dark hair. Adrian was... I don't know how to describe him. He wasn't the most conventionally attractive guy at school, but there was something about him. He had this confidence, this way of moving through the world like he owned it. He always wore these perfectly tailored clothes and had this slight accent I could never place. We'd been paired up for a few projects before, and he was funny, smart, maybe a little intense sometimes, but I'd always felt drawn to him. "Olivia, you're still here?" he asked, looking surprised. I nodded, gesturing to my sad mannequin head. "Trying to get this right before the showcase next week." "Well, I came back for my sketchbook. Lucky timing." He glanced toward the windows. "That's really coming down. How are you getting home?" I sighed. "Walking, I guess. My car's in the shop." "In this?" He shook his head. "I've got my bike. I can give you a ride." By bike, he meant his cherry red Ducati motorcycle. Everyone at school knew Adrian's bike. He treated that thing like it was his child. A motorcycle? In this weather? I must have looked as horrified as I felt. He laughed. "I've driven in worse. Come on, it'll be fun. Better than trudging through a foot of snow." I hesitated. Every logical part of me was screaming that getting on a motorcycle during a snowstorm was a terrible idea. But the alternative was a 20-minute walk in freezing temperatures, with snow already piling up on the sidewalks. "I don't know," I started. "Look," he said, "my place is only 5 minutes from here. We can wait out the worst of it there, and I'll drive you home after, or call you a cab if you prefer." I should have said no. God, I wish I had just walked home. But I didn't. I nodded, and his face lit up with a smile that made my stomach flip a little. He gave me his helmet, a glossy black full-face one that smelled faintly of his cologne. As I was putting it on, he wrapped his scarf around my neck, doubling up with my red one. "Safety first," he said with a wink. The ride was terrifying. The bike kept slipping on patches of ice, and instead of slowing down, Adrian would just laugh and gun the engine harder. I had my arms wrapped around his waist so tight I was surprised he could breathe. Every time we skidded, I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed. The ride felt way longer than 5 minutes. By the time we pulled up to his apartment building, my legs were shaking so badly I almost fell trying to get off the bike. "See? Not so bad," he said, looking exhilarated as he pulled off his beanie. Snow had collected in his dark hair, and his cheeks were flushed from the cold. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of this old converted factory building. I expected something sleek and organized. Adrian always looked so put together at school. But when he opened the door, I was shocked. The place was a mess. Not just lived in messy, but chaotic. Clothes were scattered everywhere, dirty dishes piled in the sink, and the walls were covered with these bizarre collage-type artworks that looked like they'd been made by cutting up fashion magazines. "Sorry about the disaster," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll make us some tea to warm up." I sat awkwardly on the edge of his couch, still trembling a little from the ride. My phone had died at some point, which was just perfect. I glanced around, taking in more details of the apartment. There were no personal photos anywhere, just those strange collages. Some of them had words cut out and pasted alongside the pictures, weird phrases that didn't make sense together. One near the kitchen door just said, "Watching, always watching," in letters of different sizes and fonts. "Do you make these?" I called to Adrian, who was clattering around in the kitchen. "Make what?" he called back. "These collages." There was a pause. "Oh, no, that's Mara's thing." Mara? My ex. She was really into mixed media art. The way he said it sounded dismissive, like he was bored with the topic. I was about to ask why he still had his ex's art all over his walls when I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow passed by the frosted window that faced the fire escape. It was large, definitely person-shaped, and it moved slowly, deliberately. Adrian? My voice came out higher than I intended. I think there's someone on your fire escape. He came back from the kitchen holding 2 mugs, looking completely unconcerned. Probably just Mara. Your ex? Why would your ex be on your fire escape in a snowstorm? He shrugged, handing me a mug of what smelled like peppermint tea. She gets jealous, comes by sometimes. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it? Was he serious? I set the tea down untouched, suddenly very aware that I was alone in this strange apartment with a guy I didn't actually know that well, while someone, his supposedly jealous ex, lurked outside. Adrian, that's not normal, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. If she's stalking you, you should call the police. He laughed, and something about it didn't sound right. It was too high, too tight. It's not that serious. She's harmless. As if on cue, there was a soft tap on the window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Adrian didn't even look up, just sipped his tea. The tapping came again, more insistent. Tap, 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 tap. Aren't you going to do something? I asked. She'll go away eventually, he said, still with that weird, detached calm. The tapping stopped, and for a moment I thought maybe he was right. Then I saw a face pressed against the frosted glass. I couldn't make out details through the frost, but I could see enough. A woman's face, long dark hair, and what looked like a smile. A wide, unsettling smile. Jesus Christ, I whispered. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Wait, my phone was dead. I pulled it out anyway, and somehow it had turned itself back on. There was a text from an unknown number. Red is your color, matches the blood under your nails. I nearly dropped the phone. Adrian, what the fuck is going on? He glanced at my phone, then at the window, then back at me. Something changed in his face. His eyes narrowed slightly, his mouth tightened. I told you, it's just Mara. She gets dramatic sometimes. The face disappeared from the window, but I could hear movement on the fire escape. The creak of metal, the soft sound of footsteps in snow. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I need to go, now. Adrian stood up when I did, blocking my path to the door. But the storm, I don't care about the storm. I'm leaving. I tried to move past him, but he caught my arm. Olivia, you're overreacting. It's dangerous out there. His grip wasn't exactly painful, but it was firm. Too firm. I yanked my arm away and grabbed my bag. It's more dangerous in here. He didn't try to physically stop me again, but as I moved toward the door, he said something that made me freeze. Your grandmother's scarf looks really nice on you. I turned slowly to look at him. How do you know this was from my grandmother? His face was blank for a second, then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You mentioned it at school, I think. I hadn't. I know I hadn't. The tapping started on the front door now. Tap, 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 tap. I bolted. I shoved past Adrian, flung open the door, there was no one there, which was somehow worse than if there had been, and ran down the 3 flights of stairs like the devil himself was chasing me. I didn't stop running until I was 2 blocks away, my lungs burning from the cold air. The snow was coming down harder than ever, but I didn't care. I kept moving, stumbling through drifts that came up to my knees in some places. I didn't have a destination in mind beyond away, but somehow I ended up at the parking garage where my car was being repaired. It was closed, of course, locked up tight for the night. I huddled in the sheltered entrance trying to figure out what to do. My phone was working now, and I had enough battery to call a cab, but I was shaking so hard I could barely operate the screen. That's when I noticed another text had come in from the same unknown number. You forgot your bag, beautiful hair, I'm keeping it. My hands flew to my head, my bag with all my cosmetology supplies. I'd left it at Adrian's. I started crying then, standing there in the snow, sobbing like a child. I was cold, scared, and utterly confused about what was happening. Eventually, I managed to call a cab. The driver looked concerned when he saw the state I was in, but he didn't ask questions, just cranked up the heat and drove me home. The next day, I called in sick to school. I spent the day jumping at every noise, checking my locks repeatedly, and staring at those 2 text messages. I tried blocking the number, but new ones kept coming through from different numbers. Miss you already. Your mannequin misses you too. Red scarf, red blood, pretty pretty. I finally gathered the courage to call the police. The officer who took my statement seemed skeptical from the start. When I mentioned Adrian's name, something changed in her expression. "Adrian Cortez?" she asked. I nodded. She sighed. "Ms. Thomas, we've received several complaints involving Mr. Cortez in the past month, all from a woman named Mara Linden. She claims he's been stalking her since their breakup." "What? No, that's not—" "Ms. Linden has provided extensive documentation, including text messages and witness statements. Mr. Cortez has a restraining order against him." I felt like I was going insane. But I was just at his apartment. She was there, watching us through the window. The officer made a note. "According to our records, Mr. Cortez isn't supposed to be within 500 feet of the building you described. That's Ms. Linden's apartment." Nothing made sense. I tried to explain about the motorcycle ride, the weird collages, the texts, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Why would she? It sounded crazy even to me. 2 days later, when I finally went back to school, Adrian wasn't there. His spot in the classroom was empty. When I asked one of the instructors about him, she looked confused. "Adrian? We haven't had a student named Adrian this semester." I showed her a group photo from our fall showcase, pointing him out. She squinted at the picture. "Oh, you mean Marcus. He dropped out weeks ago. I don't know who Marcus was, or Adrian, or whatever his real name might be. I don't know if Mara was his ex, or if he was her stalker, or if they were working together somehow. All I know is that after a week of those texts coming to different numbers, after finding a mannequin head in my car with my red scarf wrapped around its neck, after the police basically telling me I was either lying or being manipulated, I couldn't take it anymore. I withdrew from school, moved across the country, changed my number, my email, my social media. I even dyed my hair and started using my middle name. That was 10 months ago. I thought I was safe. I really did. But yesterday, I saw a news report about a cosmetology student who went missing after staying late at her school. They showed security footage of her leaving with someone on a red motorcycle. And last night, I heard it again. Tap, 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 on my bedroom window, on the 3rd floor. I'm writing this from a hotel room 50 miles away. I don't know where to go from here. I don't know how they found me. I don't know if it's Adrian or Mara or both of them. I don't know what they want. All I know is that I'll never be free of them. That tap, tap, tapping follows me wherever I go. I'm not much of an outdoor person, never have been. Give me a cozy blanket, a good book, and a hot cup of coffee over dirt, bugs, and unpredictable weather any day. So when Max suggested a winter camping trip in the mountains, my immediate response was a hard no. "Come on, it'll be fun," he said, giving me that boyish grin that usually gets him what he wants. "Nate and Lila are coming too. They've done this tons of times." That was Max's big selling point. His brother and his girlfriend were experienced campers. Like somehow their expertise would make sleeping on frozen ground in sub-freezing temperatures enjoyable for me. After a week of gentle pressure and promises of the most beautiful scenery you'll ever see, I caved. I told myself it was just one weekend. I could handle anything for 2 days, right? We left early Saturday morning, packing Max's Subaru Forester with more gear than I thought 4 people could possibly need. The drive took about 3 hours, winding up mountain roads that got progressively narrower and more snow-covered. The cell service disappeared about an hour in, which Max seemed thrilled about. "That's the whole point," he said when I complained. "To disconnect." By the time we turned onto the unmarked fire road that would take us to our campsite, my stomach was in knots. Not just from the winding roads, but from a growing sense of unease I couldn't quite explain. The forest around us was dense and still, too still. There was something unsettling about the silence. No birds, no wind rustling through the trees, just the crunch of snow under the tires and the hum of the engine. "This is it," Max announced, pulling into a small clearing about half a mile down the fire road. The campsite looked like something from a postcard, an open area surrounded by towering pines, all dusted with snow. Beyond the trees, I could make out the glint of a frozen lake. "Lake Hollow," Nate said, following my gaze. "It's completely frozen this time of year. We can walk on it tomorrow if you want." I nodded, but felt that knot in my stomach tighten. As we unloaded the car, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, or something, lurking between the trees. But there was never anything there, just shadows and silence. "You okay?" Lila asked, catching me mid-glance. "Yeah, it's so quiet here." She nodded. "That's what I love about winter camping. Summer's great, but there's always noise. Birds, insects, other campers. Winter has this special kind of stillness." Special wasn't the word I would have chosen. Heavy felt more accurate. The air itself seemed to press down on us, thick with something I couldn't name. We spent the afternoon setting up camp, 2 tents facing each other with a fire pit in the middle. Max and Nate went into full survival mode, chopping wood and building an impressive fire, while Lila showed me how to properly secure the tents against the cold. By late afternoon, everything was set up, and I had to admit it looked cozy. The fire was roaring, our sleeping bags were laid out in the tents, and Nate was heating up some kind of stew that actually smelled pretty good. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. We huddled around the fire, eating stew from metal bowls and passing around a flask of whiskey Nate had brought. The alcohol warmed my insides and took the edge off my anxiety. Max and Nate told stories about camping trips from their childhood, and Lila chimed in with a few creepy tales about hikers going missing in these mountains. "Probably just got lost," Nate said when he saw my expression. "These woods can be disorienting if you don't know what you're doing." "That's why we stay together," Max added, squeezing my hand. By around 10 p.m., the fire was dying down and the cold was becoming unbearable. We decided to call it a night, separating into our respective tents, Nate and Lila in one, Max and me in the other. Our tent was small but warm once we were inside our sleeping bags. Max fell asleep almost instantly, but I lay awake, listening. That oppressive silence had returned, broken only by Max's steady breathing and the occasional crack of a branch in the distance. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake, heart pounding. Something had woken me, a sound maybe, or just the sense that something was wrong. I fumbled for my phone. The screen read 3:17 a.m. "Max," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He didn't stir. That's when I realized how cold it was. Not just the normal nighttime chill, but a bone-deep, biting cold that shouldn't have been possible inside our tent with our thermal sleeping bags. I sat up, my breath fogging in front of my face. Something felt off, really off. "Max," I said again, louder this time. He mumbled something but didn't wake up. I unzipped my sleeping bag, wincing as the cold air hit me, and crawled toward the tent entrance. With shaking fingers, I unzipped the flap and peered outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. Our campsite, our carefully arranged, perfectly organized campsite, was in shambles. The fire pit had been scattered, coals and ashes thrown in every direction. Our cooler was overturned, its contents strewn across the snow. Nate and Lila's tent was slashed open from top to bottom, the fabric hanging in ribbons. My backpack, which I'd left propped against a tree, had been torn apart. My clothes, my books, everything inside was ripped to shreds and tossed around like confetti. But the most terrifying part, there were no footprints, no animal tracks, no human footprints, nothing to indicate what had caused this destruction. Just our own tracks from earlier, now partially filled with fresh snow. I scrambled back inside the tent, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "Max," I hissed, shaking him violently now. "Max, wake up." He finally opened his eyes, blinking in confusion. "What? What's wrong?" "Something happened," I said, my voice breaking. "Outside, everything's destroyed." He sat up immediately, fully awake now. "What do you mean, destroyed?" "Just look," I said, gesturing toward the tent entrance. Max crawled out, and I followed, clinging to the back of his jacket like a child. I heard his sharp intake of breath as he took in the scene. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Should we check on Nate and Lila?" I asked, suddenly terrified for them. Their tent was in worse shape than our campsite. Max nodded, and we approached the shredded tent cautiously. "Nate," Max called out. "Lila?" No response. Max reached for the ruined tent flap, and I held my breath, afraid of what we might find. But the tent was empty. No Nate, no Lila, no sleeping bags, nothing. "Where are they?" I whispered. Max shook his head, his face pale in the moonlight. "I don't know." We called their names, our voices echoing through the trees with no response. That's when Max noticed something else. "The car," he said suddenly. "Where's the car?" I looked to where we'd parked the Subaru. The space was empty, just a rectangular patch of snow without tire tracks leading away. "This isn't possible," Max said, running his hands through his hair. "This isn't fucking possible." I was beyond fear now, in some numb state of shock where nothing seemed real. We were miles from civilization with no car, no supplies, and no idea what had happened to our companions. "Max!" Nate's voice came from the trees, and we both spun around. Nate and Lila emerged from the forest, their faces tight with fear and confusion. "What happened?" Max demanded. "Where were you?" "We woke up and everything was like this," Lila said, gesturing at the destroyed campsite. "We thought maybe a bear." "A bear wouldn't take the car," I interrupted. "We went looking for it," Nate explained. "We found it." "Where?" Max asked. "Down the hill," Nate said, pointing toward the lake. You need to see it." The four of us trudged through the snow, following Nate and Lila. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? Nothing about this made sense. After about 15 minutes of walking, we came to the edge of a steep hill that sloped down toward the frozen lake. And there, at the bottom, was Max's Subaru, half buried in snow, its front end crumpled against a tree. "How?" Max began, but trailed off. We carefully made our way down the hill. The car looked like it had rolled or been pushed down the incline. But again, there were no tracks, no sign of how it had gotten there. Max approached it cautiously and tried the driver's door. It opened. The keys were sitting neatly on the driver's seat. "The keys were in the tent with me," Max said, his voice hollow. "In my jacket pocket." I remembered him putting them there before we went to sleep. There was no way anyone could have taken them without waking us up. We spent the next hour trying to dig the car out and assess the damage. The front end was smashed, but after some tinkering, Max got the engine to start. It was our only way out of there, damaged or not. We didn't bother going back for our supplies. Most of it was destroyed anyway, and none of us wanted to spend another minute at that campsite. We squeezed into the battered Subaru and slowly made our way back up to the fire road. The drive home was silent. No one seemed to know what to say. What had we just experienced? A prank? A weird animal attack? Nothing made sense. It wasn't until we were about an hour from home, cell service finally returning, that Max spoke. "I had a dream," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Last night, I dreamed something was in our tent." I turned to look at him. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road. "What do you mean, something?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. It was crouched over me, watching me, but its face," he swallowed hard, "its face was wrong. It wasn't supposed to exist." "It was just a nightmare," Lila said from the back seat, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then how do you explain what happened?" Nate asked. No one had an answer. We dropped Nate and Lila off at their apartment, making vague promises to talk later that we all knew we wouldn't keep. Some experiences are too strange, too unsettling to revisit. Max and I haven't gone camping since. He sold the Subaru a month later, claiming he needed something with better gas mileage, but I knew the real reason. Neither of us could look at that car without remembering. It's been 3 years, and I still don't know what happened that night. Sometimes I convince myself it was just a bizarre sequence of events. Maybe some local kids playing a cruel prank, or a combination of animal activity and a car with faulty brakes. But then I remember the silence of those woods, the heaviness in the air, the way everything felt wrong from the moment we arrived. And I wonder about what Max saw in his dream, that thing with the face that wasn't supposed to exist. I wonder if it's still there, waiting in those woods, waiting for the next group of campers who don't know any better. I guess I'll never know for sure. But I do know one thing. You couldn't pay me enough to go back to Lake Hollow. I was never much of an outdoorsy type growing up. My family didn't do camping trips or hiking adventures. We were more the stay-at-home and watch movies kind. But something changed during my junior year of college. I started feeling this weird pull toward nature, toward solitude. Maybe it was the stress of classes or the constant noise of dorm life, but I found myself watching wilderness survival videos and scrolling through camping gear websites at 2 a.m. My parents thought I was going through some phase when I told them I wanted to try winter camping. Dad actually laughed. "Emily, you complained about the cold when we visited your grandmother in Ohio last Christmas," he said. Mom was more concerned than amused. She showed me news articles about hikers getting lost, about unprepared campers suffering hypothermia. "At least go with friends," she begged. But that defeated the whole purpose. I needed to be alone. I chose Cold Ridge because it wasn't popular this time of year. Most sane people avoid camping when temperatures drop below freezing, which meant I'd have the trails to myself. The ranger at the visitor center gave me a weird look when I registered for a 3-night backcountry permit. "You're going up alone?" he asked, eyeing my new backpack and boots. I nodded, trying to look more confident than I felt. He sighed, then circled an area on my map. "Set up here if you can. It's sheltered from the wind, and there's a stream for water. Make sure you melt the ice first." He hesitated before adding, "If the weather turns, don't try to be a hero. Just pack up and come back." I remember how quiet it was when I parked at the trailhead. No cars, no people, just endless white stretching into the distance. The snow had fallen the night before, thick, pristine, untouched, and the trail markers were barely visible. For a moment, I sat in my car with the heater running, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. But then I thought about returning to campus, admitting defeat, and something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to quit before I even started. The hike in took longer than I'd expected. My pack weighed around 40 pounds with all my gear, and trudging through knee-deep snow was exhausting. By the time I reached the clearing the ranger had recommended, the sun was already lowering behind the ridge. I had maybe an hour of daylight left. Setting up camp alone is different than when you're with others. Every decision feels heavier. I stomped down snow to create a flat area for my tent, gathered wood while I still had light, and melted snow for drinking water. The temperature was dropping fast. The thermometer on my backpack read 15 degrees Celsius, but I felt strangely calm. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional crack of a distant tree branch giving way under the weight of snow. That first night was actually peaceful. I built a small fire, heated some dehydrated pasta, and sat watching the flames dance against the darkening sky. The stars came out, more stars than I'd ever seen, brilliant against the black canvas. No light pollution, no distant highway sounds, just me and the wilderness. I remember thinking this was exactly what I needed. I slept surprisingly well, bundled in my 0-degree sleeping bag with a hot water bottle at my feet. The cold air on my face contrasted with the warmth of my cocoon, and I drifted off feeling oddly proud of myself. The second day passed uneventfully. I explored the area around my camp, practiced building different fire structures like I'd seen in those YouTube videos, and even tried ice fishing in the frozen stream with 0 success. As darkness fell again, I felt a growing sense of accomplishment. I was doing it. I was actually surviving alone in the winter wilderness. That night was when everything changed. I woke up suddenly around 2 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure what had disturbed me. Maybe a dream, maybe the cold, but then I heard it. Footsteps, the unmistakable sound of someone walking through snow, the crunch-crunch rhythm approaching my tent. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There shouldn't be anyone else out here. The ranger had said the area was deserted this time of year. The footsteps circled my tent slowly, once, twice. I could see the shadow of someone passing between me and the dying embers of my fire. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but fear had locked my voice away. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Then the footsteps stopped. I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I must have fallen back asleep. Morning light filtered through the thin fabric of my tent, and for a moment, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. A nightmare, that's all it was. But when I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the evidence was right there in the snow, a perfect circle of footprints around my tent, then another. They weren't animal tracks, they were clearly human boots, larger than mine. The fire pit had been disturbed too. Someone had arranged the remaining logs into a strange pattern, almost like an arrow pointing east, deeper into the wilderness. I stood there, shivering not just from the cold, taking in the scene. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up and leave immediately. But something else, pride, stubbornness, or maybe just denial, made me stay. I told myself it was probably another camper, someone who'd gotten lost and found my fire. Maybe they'd been trying to wake me, but didn't want to frighten me. It was weird, sure, but not necessarily threatening. Besides, hiking out now meant arriving at the trailhead after dark, and somehow that seemed even more dangerous. So I stayed. I spent the day close to camp, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. I collected more firewood, building a larger fire than I needed, telling myself it was for warmth. As the sun began to set on my third day at Cold Ridge, I made a decision. I'd leave at first light tomorrow, cutting my trip short by one day. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat up in my tent, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other. The fire outside cast dancing shadows on the tent walls, and I watched them, trying to distinguish between the normal movement of flames and something else. It was around midnight when I heard the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the trees or the crackle of the fire, but then they became clearer, not distinct words, but definitely human sounds, just beyond the circle of firelight. I sat completely still, straining to hear. Then came the footsteps again, slower this time, more deliberate. A shadow appeared on the tent wall, the unmistakable silhouette of a person. They were standing between me and the fire, just watching my tent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as the shadow grew larger, indicating the person was moving closer. Then a hand pressed against the outside of my tent, leaving an impression in the fabric. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming. The hand moved along the side of the tent like they were feeling for something or someone inside. I don't know where I found the courage, but suddenly I was moving, unzipping the tent with shaking hands and bursting outside, bear spray extended in front of me. There was a man standing about 10 feet away. The hood of his parka was pulled up, obscuring most of his face in shadow. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He didn't run. He just stood there, watching me with an intensity I could feel, even though I couldn't clearly see his eyes. "What do you want?" My voice came out higher and shakier than I intended. He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly bent down and placed something in the snow before backing away, never taking his attention off me. When he reached the edge of the firelight, he simply turned and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for what felt like forever, bear spray still pointed at the spot where he'd vanished. Eventually, I forced myself to look at what he'd left in the snow. It was a piece of paper, a note, held down by a small rock. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and brought it closer to the fire to read. The message was written in neat, precise handwriting. "You're perfect out here, just you and the snow. They'll make me wait too long." I don't remember packing up my camp. I don't remember how I managed to stuff everything into my backpack or how I found the trail in the darkness. All I know is that I was moving, practically running through the snow, guided only by my headlamp and pure terror. The hike that had taken me hours in daylight somehow passed in what felt like minutes. Adrenaline is a hell of a thing. I kept looking back, convinced I would see him following me, but there was only darkness behind me and the small circle of light ahead. When I finally reached the parking lot, my car sat alone under a street lamp, covered in a fresh dusting of snow. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice in the snow. That's when I saw it. A small piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. I almost left it there, almost jumped in my car and drove away without looking. but some morbid curiosity made me take it. See you next winter. 4 simple words that felt like ice water in my veins. I threw the note away, started the car, and drove straight through the night, not stopping until I reached the campus parking lot, where I finally broke down. I reported the incident to the park rangers and local police. They took my statement, but I could tell they weren't taking it very seriously. A woman alone in the woods, getting spooked by noises, maybe misinterpreting another hiker's actions. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard back. My parents were horrified when I told them what happened. Dad wanted to drive up there himself and demand answers. Mom just held me and cried, probably thinking about all those news articles she'd shown me. That was 2 years ago. I've never been camping since, not in winter, not in summer, not even in my backyard. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear footsteps in snow outside my window, even in the middle of July. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was just some weird hermit who lives in those woods. Maybe it was another hiker playing a sick joke. But deep down, I know it was something else. Something about me, alone in those woods, attracted whatever or whoever that was. And they're still out there, waiting for next winter, waiting for someone else who needs to escape into the wilderness alone. I still have the camping gear. It sits in my closet, untouched since that night. Sometimes I think about selling it, but that would mean explaining to potential buyers why I'm getting rid of brand new equipment. And I can't bring myself to tell that story again, to see the doubt in their eyes, the silent judgment. So I keep the gear, and I keep the memories, and I stay away from snowy forests and remote trails. And every winter, when the first snow falls, I check my car in the morning for notes under the windshield wiper, just in case. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. Last January, my husband Caleb suggested we take our 4-month-old daughter Mia winter camping. I thought he was joking at first. Taking our baby into the wilderness in the middle of winter? I immediately said no. Mia was my first child, and I was still struggling with the constant worry that comes with being a new mom. It'll be perfectly safe, Caleb kept saying. We'll bring the portable heater, extra blankets, everything we need. People camp with babies all the time. Caleb had always been the outdoorsy type. It was one of the things that attracted me to him when we first met. He grew up in Montana and spent half his childhood in tents and cabins. I was more of a hot shower and comfy bed kind of person, but I'd gone camping with him a few times before I got pregnant. What ultimately changed my mind was when he mentioned Beth would come along too. Beth was this woman from our childbirth class who had really attached herself to us during my pregnancy. She was a midwife or doula or something. I was never entirely clear on her credentials, but she'd been incredibly helpful after Mia was born. She'd bring over homemade meals, offer to watch Mia so I could shower or nap, and generally made those first few weeks a lot more manageable. Having Beth there will be great, Caleb said. She knows more about babies than both of us combined. If anything happens, she'll know what to do. I reluctantly agreed, and we started planning the trip to a campsite about 2 hours from our house in northern Michigan. It wasn't deep wilderness or anything. There were designated camping spots with fire pits, though in winter they're practically deserted. The day we left, Beth showed up at our house with this massive backpack and a weird energy about her. She was practically bouncing with excitement. "There's my fierce little thing," she squealed when she saw Mia. That was a nickname she'd started using recently. I didn't love it, but I didn't say anything because Beth had been so helpful. During the drive, Beth sat in the back with Mia while I navigated. She kept leaning over the car seat, talking to my daughter in this high-pitched baby voice. "You're going to love the forest. It's in your blood, isn't it? Yes, it is. Yes, it is." I exchanged a look with Caleb, but he just shrugged. Beth had always been a bit intense, especially with Mia. We arrived at the campsite around noon. It had snowed the night before, so everything was covered in about 6 inches of fresh powder. The trees were laden with snow, and our breath came out in big white puffs. Despite my reservations, it was beautiful. Setting up camp took longer than expected. Caleb worked on getting the tent ready. We'd brought our large 4-person tent with extra insulation, while Beth and I unloaded supplies. The whole time, Beth kept Mia strapped to her chest in my baby carrier, which I hadn't exactly offered her. "She's so alert out here," Beth kept saying. "She can feel the energy of the forest." I wanted to point out that Mia was alert pretty much anywhere when she wasn't sleeping, but I kept my mouth shut. Beth was doing us a favor by coming along. Once the tent was set up, Caleb started working on the fire. I tried to take Mia back for a feeding, but Beth hesitated. "I made something special for you," she said, reaching into her backpack. She pulled out a thermos. "It's my special lactation tea. It'll help your milk and keep Mia strong." I didn't need help with my milk supply, but Beth was insistent. "It has special herbs I forage myself. Women in my family have used these recipes for generations." The tea tasted bitter and earthy. I only took a few sips before setting it aside, but Beth kept eyeing the thermos, asking if I wanted more every half hour. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed Beth was almost never more than an arm's length away from Mia. When I was changing her diaper, Beth hovered over us. When I was feeding her, Beth sat right beside me, staring at my daughter with this intense look in her eyes. "She looks like she could be mine," Beth said suddenly while I was burping Mia after a feeding. "What?" "Oh, just that she has dark hair like me," Beth said quickly. "Not like your blonde or Caleb's light brown." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. My mom had dark hair, so Mia's coloring wasn't unusual, but the way Beth said it made me uncomfortable. That evening, we ate dinner around the campfire, dehydrated camping meals that tasted better than they had any right to. Beth kept Mia on her lap most of the time, only handing her back when it was time for another feeding. Each time, she'd offer me more of that tea. "It's getting late," I finally said around 8. "I should put Mia down for the night." "I can do it," Beth volunteered immediately. "I have a special lullaby that—" "No, that's okay," I interrupted, perhaps too quickly. "She's used to our bedtime routine." I took Mia into the tent and got her ready for sleep in the small portable bassinet we'd brought. Caleb had set up the portable heater, and the tent was surprisingly cozy. I stayed with Mia until she fell asleep, then rejoined Caleb and Beth at the fire. Beth was telling Caleb about some herbs she'd been studying. "They were used in ancient rituals," she was saying, "for protecting children and binding them to their guardians." When she saw me, she stopped abruptly and smiled. "Is my fierce little thing sleeping?" "Mia's down for the night, hopefully," I said, emphasizing my daughter's actual name. We stayed up for another hour or so, and I couldn't help but notice Beth kept glancing toward the tent. Eventually, Caleb put out the fire, and we all headed in to sleep. Beth had her own sleeping bag on the opposite side of the tent from our family section. I slept fitfully that first night, waking at every sound, which in a forest in winter turns out to be a lot. Each time I woke, I checked on Mia, who was sleeping peacefully between Caleb and me. Once, around 3 a.m., I thought I saw Beth sitting up in her sleeping bag, just staring in our direction. But when I blinked and looked again, she appeared to be sleeping. The next morning, Beth was already outside when I woke up. She'd restarted the fire and was boiling water. "Tea?" she offered as soon as I emerged from the tent with Mia. "Just regular coffee for me, thanks." "The tea is better for Mia," Beth insisted. "It passes through your milk." Caleb came out of the tent then, and Beth immediately turned to him with a bright smile. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" It was beautiful. The sun was shining on the fresh snow, making everything glitter. After breakfast, we decided to go for a short hike on one of the trails. Beth immediately offered to carry Mia in the baby carrier. "Actually, I'd like to carry her," I said. "I missed her while she was sleeping." Beth's smile faltered for just a second before she nodded. "Of course, Mama Bear. You need that bonding time." Throughout the hike, Beth walked uncomfortably close to me, pointing out different plants and trees to Mia, as if my 4-month-old could possibly understand or care. She kept touching Mia's cheek or adjusting her hat, even though everything was fine. We returned to camp for lunch, and Beth pulled out a small jar of what looked like honey. "Special forest honey," she said. "Just a tiny taste on her lips will help her connect with the wilderness." "She's too young for honey," I said firmly. "It can cause botulism in babies." "This is different," Beth insisted. "It's been blessed and purified." "No, honey," Caleb backed me up, giving Beth a strange look. Beth put the jar away without another word, but I caught her looking at it several times throughout the afternoon. That evening, things got even weirder. While Caleb was cooking dinner, Beth sat next to me as I fed Mia. Out of nowhere, she asked, "Have you ever heard of spiritual adoption?" "What?" "It's when a child chooses their true mother, regardless of blood." She was staring at Mia with that intense look again. "Sometimes a baby's soul recognizes its real protector." I scooted away slightly, tightening my hold on Mia. "Beth, that's an interesting concept. I've been having dreams about Mia since before she was born," Beth continued, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "In the dreams, she comes to me in the forest. She's always calling me Mama." "Beth," I said carefully, "I think you might be getting a little too attached to Mia. She's not—" "Dinner's ready," Caleb called out, and I've never been so grateful for an interruption. Throughout dinner, Beth kept trying to feed Mia little bits of her food, despite us repeatedly telling her Mia was too young for solids. She also kept referring to Mia as "my fierce little thing" or "my little cub." Each time I corrected her, "You mean Mia." That night, I whispered my concerns to Caleb as we got ready for bed. "I think you're overreacting," he said, though he looked uncertain. "Beth is just really into babies. It's her job, remember? There's professional interest, and then there's whatever this is," I insisted. "Did you hear what she said about spiritual adoption?" Caleb frowned. "That is weird, but we're leaving tomorrow afternoon anyway. Let's just get through one more night." I didn't sleep well that second night. Every noise had me on edge. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of movement. At first, I thought it was just Beth turning over in her sleeping bag, but then I realized her sleeping bag was empty. My heart started pounding. I quickly checked next to me. Mia was still there, sleeping soundly. Caleb was snoring softly on her other side. Then I heard footsteps outside, not animals, but definitely human. Someone walking slowly around our tent. I nudged Caleb awake. "There's someone outside," I whispered. "And Beth's not in the tent?" Caleb sat up, instantly alert. We listened together as the footsteps circled the tent once more before fading into the distance, heading into the woods. "Should we look?" I asked. Caleb hesitated, then shook his head. "Let's wait. If it is Beth, she's probably just going to the bathroom." We waited, but the minutes ticked by with no sign of Beth returning. Just as Caleb was about to get up and check outside, we heard footsteps approaching again. The tent zipper slowly opened and Beth slipped inside. In the dim light from our small battery-powered lantern, I could see snow on her boots and pants. She didn't say anything, just crawled back into her sleeping bag and turned away from us. Caleb and I exchanged worried glances but didn't confront her. Something felt very wrong, and I didn't want to escalate the situation in the middle of the night in the wilderness. I barely slept after that. I kept one arm protectively around Mia for the rest of the night. In the morning, Beth was cheerful and acted as if nothing had happened. She already had water boiling for her tea when Caleb and I emerged from the tent. "Did you sleep well?" she asked brightly. "Actually, we heard someone walking around the tent last night," Caleb said directly. "Was that you?" Beth's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I just needed to use the bathroom. You know how it is." "You were gone for quite a while," I said. "Was I? I guess I took a little walk to clear my head. The forest is so beautiful at night." As she spoke, I noticed something behind her on the ground, footprints in the snow leading from our tent into the woods. Not just a quick trip to relieve herself, but deep into the trees. "What were you doing in the woods in the middle of the night?" I asked. Beth's smile tightened. "Just connecting with nature. It's a spiritual practice of mine." Caleb had noticed the footprints too. "I think we should pack up and head home early," he said firmly. "The weather report shows snow coming in this afternoon." "Oh, we can't leave yet," Beth protested. "I had plans for us today. I wanted to show Mia the special clearing I found. It's perfect for a blessing ceremony." "A what?" I asked. "Just a little nature appreciation ritual," Beth said quickly. "Nothing weird, I promise." "We're leaving," Caleb repeated. "The forecast doesn't look good." Beth's face changed then, just for a moment, into something hard and cold that I'd never seen before. Then the smile was back, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, if that's what you think is best," she said. "Safety first." We packed up camp in tense silence. Beth kept trying to take Mia, offering to keep her entertained while we worked, but I kept my daughter firmly attached to me in her carrier. As Caleb was dismantling the tent, Beth pulled me aside. "You know I only want what's best for her, right? For my fierce little thing?" "She's not yours, Beth," I said quietly but firmly. "She's our daughter, mine and Caleb's." Beth stared at me for an uncomfortably long time before nodding slowly. "Of course. That's what I meant." The drive home was awkward. Beth sat in the back next to Mia again, but this time she was quiet, just staring out the window for most of the journey. Occasionally I'd catch her whispering something to Mia when she thought I wasn't paying attention. When we dropped Beth off at her house, she hugged me too tightly and held on for too long. "We'll do this again soon," she said. It wasn't a question. "Maybe," I replied non-committally. "Thanks for coming along." "Anything for my little cub," she said, and then quickly added, "I mean, for Mia, and you guys, of course." As we drove away, Caleb and I both exhaled in relief. "That was weird, right?" he asked. "I'm not just imagining it?" "Definitely weird," I confirmed. "I don't think we should hang out with Beth anymore." "Agreed." When we got home and started unpacking, I found something in Mia's diaper bag that I hadn't packed, a small wooden carving of a lion. It was nestled at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of paper with strange symbols drawn on it. There was no note, but it had to have been from Beth. I immediately blocked Beth's number on my phone and removed her from all my social media. Caleb did the same. For a few weeks, I jumped every time the doorbell rang or when I saw a car driving slowly past our house. Then, about 3 weeks after the camping trip, I ran into Sarah, another mom from our childbirth class. She mentioned she'd been spending time with Beth recently. "Beth's been such a help with the baby," Sarah said. "We even went camping last weekend. Can you believe it? Winter camping with a 3-month-old? I never would have been brave enough without Beth." My blood ran cold. Did she give you any special tea or anything?" Sarah looked surprised. "Yeah, this herbal thing for milk production. How did you know?" "Just a guess," I said faintly. "Does she have any nicknames for your baby?" "It's cute, actually. She calls him her little cub. Says he has the heart of a lion." I wanted to warn Sarah right then, tell her everything, but I could see she was already under Beth's spell, just like I had been initially. Would she even believe me? Instead, I took her number and promised to set up a play date soon. As soon as I got home, I called her and told her everything, presenting it as calmly as I could. There was a long silence when I finished. "I thought she was just being nice," Sarah finally said in a small voice. "She offered to babysit this weekend so my husband and I could have a date night." "Don't leave your baby with her," I said urgently. "I don't know what she's planning, but something is very wrong with Beth." Sarah must have believed me, because she texted the next day saying she'd made excuses to cancel her plans with Beth. A week later, she called to tell me Beth had shown up at her house unannounced, demanding to see her cub. Sarah's husband had to threaten to call the police before Beth would leave. We filed a police report after that, but there wasn't much they could do. Being creepy and obsessive isn't illegal. They suggested a restraining order, but we didn't have enough documentation of threatening behavior to get one. It's been 5 months now, and we haven't heard from Beth directly, though I sometimes get the feeling we're being watched. Twice, I've found small wooden animal carvings on our front porch. Once a lion, once a bear. No note, just the carvings. We're moving next month to a different city. We haven't told anyone where we're going except our immediate family. It feels extreme, but every time I think about those footprints in the snow, leading from our tent into the dark woods, and Beth's strange behavior with Mia, I'm convinced we're doing the right thing. I still don't know what Beth was doing in the forest that night, or what she meant by a blessing ceremony, or why she seems fixated on calling babies her cubs and fierce little things. Part of me doesn't want to know, but I do know that Beth will never get near my daughter again. Whatever obsession she's developed, whatever delusion she's living in where these babies somehow belong to her, Mia won't be part of it. I still jolt awake some nights feeling like I'm back in that tent, hearing those footsteps circling around us in the snow. It's been 8 years, but some things just stick with you no matter how much time passes. I guess I'm finally ready to write it all down, even though I doubt anyone will believe me. I barely believe it myself sometimes. My dad was always big on our annual winter camping trip. He called it character building. But honestly, I think he just liked getting away from everything. No phones, no internet, just us versus nature for 3 days. It was our thing. Me, my little sister Emily, and Dad. That year, Emily had begged to bring along Liam, our next-door neighbor who was the same age as her, 14 at the time. I was 16 and thought I was too cool for the whole thing, but Dad insisted it was family tradition. We drove about 4 hours north to this lake called Blackwater. I remember thinking the name should have been our first warning. Dad had found it online. One of the last truly remote spots was how he described it. The lake was frozen solid and surrounded by dense pine forest. The nearest town was like 40 minutes away, and the dirt road leading to our campsite was barely visible under all the snow. When we first got there, something felt off. I can't explain it exactly. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, except it was clear and freezing cold. Emily and Liam were throwing snowballs at each other and laughing, but their voices sounded muffled somehow. Dad was his usual cheerful self, showing us how to properly set up the winter tents and getting the fire going. "This is going to be the best trip yet," he kept saying. I didn't argue, but I couldn't shake this crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like we were being watched. Setting up camp took longer than usual because of all the snow. We had 2 tents, one for Dad and me, the other for Emily and Liam. Dad had made it very clear they were to keep the tent flap open, which made Emily roll her eyes dramatically. By the time we finished, the sun was already setting, and the temperature dropped fast. We sat around the fire eating hot dogs and marshmallows. Dad tried to get us to sing camping songs, but we weren't little kids anymore. Instead, he told his usual ghost stories. The one about the hitchhiker who disappears, the one about the hook hand. I'd heard them all before, but Emily and Liam were eating it up. I was distracted. The woods around us were so quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. Just the crackling of our fire and our voices. In all our previous camping trips, you'd at least hear owls or the rustling of nocturnal animals. But here, nothing. "You okay?" Dad asked me, noticing I was staring into the darkness. "Yeah, just tired," I lied. We turned in early because it was so cold. Dad and I zipped up in our sleeping bags, and I could hear Emily and Liam whispering and giggling in their tent before they finally quieted down. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew I was wide awake in pitch darkness. Something had woken me up. A sound. At first, I thought maybe it was just the tent fabric moving in the wind, but there wasn't any wind. Then I heard it again. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps in snow. Slow, deliberate steps circling our tent. My heart started pounding so hard, I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The footsteps continued, making a full circle around our tent, then stopping right at the entrance. I was frozen, too terrified to even wake Dad. Then I heard the zipper of our tent being slowly pulled up, just an inch or two, before stopping. I must have made some noise because Dad stirred beside me. "What's wrong?" he whispered. "There's someone outside," I whispered back, my voice shaking. Dad was immediately alert. He grabbed the flashlight and the hunting knife he always brought on these trips. "Stay here," he ordered. Before I could stop him, he'd unzipped the tent and stepped outside. I sat there in the dark, straining to hear anything. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, Dad came back in, looking confused. "There's nobody out there," he said, "and no footprints either, except ours from earlier." "But I heard someone walking around the tent," I insisted. "They tried to open the zipper." Dad looked at me for a long moment. "The wind can play tricks out here, and the cold makes the tent materials contract and expand. That might have been the zipper noise." I knew what I heard wasn't the wind or the cold, but Dad seemed so certain. He checked on Emily and Liam, who were both sound asleep, completely unaware. Eventually, I pretended to go back to sleep too, but I stayed awake until the first light of dawn seeped through the tent walls. When we all got up in the morning, Emily was the first one out of her tent. I heard her call out, "Hey, who made these?" We all stepped outside to see what she was talking about. About 20 feet from our campsite, there was a perfect circle of snowballs. Not just randomly placed, but meticulously arranged in a complete circle, each snowball exactly the same size, about as big as a softball. "Did you do this last night?" Emily asked Dad. Dad shook his head slowly. "No, I thought maybe you kids were playing around before I got up." Liam looked genuinely confused. "Not me." We all denied making them. I felt sick to my stomach, remembering the footsteps from the night before. Dad tried to laugh it off. "Must be some other campers playing a prank," he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. We all knew there was no one else around for miles. We tried to go on with our day as normal. Dad took us ice fishing on the lake, but nobody's heart was really in it. Emily kept looking back toward the woods. Liam was quieter than usual. Around noon, Emily said she needed to use the bathroom, so she headed toward the portable toilet Dad had set up a short distance from camp. A few minutes later, she came running back, her face white as the snow around us. "There's someone in the woods," she gasped. "I saw him watching me." Dad immediately stood up. "Where? Show me." Emily pointed toward a dense section of pines, about 50 yards from our camp. Dad grabbed his binoculars and scanned the area. "I don't see anyone," he said after a minute. "What did they look like?" "I just saw someone standing really still between the trees," Emily said, her voice small. "When I looked directly at them, they stepped back behind a tree." Dad decided to investigate. He took his hunting knife and told us kids to stay together by the lake where we could see in all directions. We watched him trudge through the snow toward the trees Emily had pointed out. He disappeared among them for about 10 minutes before returning. "No footprints except mine," he reported, "and no place for anyone to hide without leaving tracks." But Emily was adamant about what she'd seen, and I believed her. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. Dad decided we should all stick together for the rest of the day. We collected firewood, made lunch, and even played some card games. But there was this tension hovering over everything. Each of us kept glancing toward the tree line every few minutes. The sun started setting way too early, like it was in a hurry to leave us alone in the dark. As night fell, Dad built the fire bigger than usual. We huddled around it, not talking much. I could tell Dad was reconsidering our 3-day plan, but he didn't want to freak us out by suggesting we leave early. We ate dinner in silence. The darkness beyond our fire seemed to press in on us from all sides. I kept thinking I saw movement at the edge of the firelight, but every time I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. Around 9, Dad suggested we turn in, but none of us wanted to get in those tents. Instead, we stayed by the fire, none of us willing to be the first to admit we were scared. That's when I saw him. Just beyond the circle of light from our fire, standing perfectly still, was a man. He was tall, really tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing what looked like a dark coat that reached almost to the ground. The firelight didn't seem to touch his face, leaving it in shadow, but I could feel him staring right at me. In his right hand, hanging loosely at his side, was what looked like a hatchet. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared back at him, hoping I was imagining things. But then he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his left hand to his face and put his finger to his lips in a shushing gesture. That broke my paralysis. "Dad," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the figure. "Don't look now, but there's someone standing over there." Dad tensed beside me, but didn't turn immediately. "Where?" "By that cluster of pines, just at the edge of the light. He has a hatchet." Dad slowly reached for his knife. "Emily, Liam," he said calmly, "I want you to very casually get up and go into the tent. Now." They must have heard something in his voice because they didn't argue. As they stood up, the man in the coat took a single step forward, and I saw his face for a split second in the firelight. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too tight over his skull. His eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's, and he was smiling, a wide, unnatural smile that showed too many teeth. Then he was gone, stepping backward into the darkness so suddenly it was like he'd been swallowed by it. Dad jumped to his feet. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Get in the tent," Dad ordered. "All of you, now." We scrambled to obey. Inside the tent, Dad zipped the flap shut and positioned himself between us and the entrance, knife in hand. "What did you see?" Emily asked, her voice tiny with fear. "Just someone wandering around," Dad said, trying to sound casual. "Probably another camper who got lost." But I could see in his eyes that he'd seen the same thing I had, and it wasn't any lost camper. None of us slept that night. We sat in tense silence, jumping at every sound outside the tent. Around midnight, the footsteps returned, circling our tent again and again, sometimes stopping, sometimes speeding up, like whatever was out there was playing with us. Dad gripped his knife so tight his knuckles turned white. Just before dawn, the footsteps finally stopped. We waited another hour before Dad cautiously unzipped the tent and peered out. "We're packing up," he announced. "Now, we're leaving." No one argued. We emerged from the tent to find another circle of snowballs, this time much closer to our tents. And in the center of the circle was Dad's hunting knife, the spare one he kept in his backpack inside our tent. Emily started crying. Liam looked like he might throw up. Dad's face went hard in a way I'd never seen before. "Get your things," he said. "Only what's essential. We're getting out of here now." We moved as fast as we could, throwing our sleeping bags and a few supplies into our backpacks. Dad had just started dismantling the first tent when we heard the sound of wood splitting. We all turned to see the man in the dark coat standing at the edge of our camp, the hatchet buried in one of our supply crates. He pulled it out slowly and took a step toward us. "Run," Dad said quietly. Then louder, "Run! To the car! Now!" Dad lunged forward with his knife as the man swung his hatchet. I grabbed Emily's hand and we ran, Liam right behind us. I heard sounds of struggle, but I didn't look back. We plowed through the snow toward the path that led to where we'd parked the car. We were maybe 50 yards away when I realized Dad wasn't behind us. I stopped, gasping for breath. "Dad!" I yelled. Emily was sobbing beside me. Then I saw him, running toward us through the trees, his jacket torn and blood on his face. "Keep going!" he shouted. We ran again, slipping and stumbling through the snow. The car seemed impossibly far away. Behind us, I could hear breaking branches and heavy footsteps. Whatever was chasing us wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. We finally reached the car, and Dad fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them in the snow. Liam spotted them and snatched them up, pressing them into Dad's hand. As Dad unlocked the car, I turned back toward the woods. The man in the coat was standing about 30 yards away, watching us. He wasn't running anymore. He just stood there, hatchet in hand, that horrible smile still on his face. As we piled into the car, he raised his hand in a small wave. Dad started the engine and floored it, the tires spinning in the snow before finally catching. As we fishtailed down the narrow road, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. The man didn't chase after us. He just stood there, getting smaller and smaller, until the trees swallowed him from view. We drove in silence all the way back to town. Dad stopped at the local police station, but when he tried to explain what happened, the officer looked at us like we were crazy. There were no other reports of anyone dangerous in the area. When Dad described the man, the officer's expression changed. "That sounds like an old ghost story around these parts," he said. "There's supposed to be a hermit who lives in those woods. Been there since before any of us were born. Folks say he doesn't like visitors." The officer agreed to send someone to check out our campsite, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. Whatever that was back there, it wasn't something the police could handle. Dad had 3 stitches from a cut on his forehead. He told us the man had swung the hatchet at him and he'd barely dodged it before managing to shove the guy away and run. We never went camping again after that. Dad sold all our gear a month later. Sometimes I think about going back just to see if it was real or if we all somehow shared the same nightmare. But then I remember that smile, those eyes reflecting the firelight, and the way he put his finger to his lips like he was sharing a secret with me. I don't know what would have happened if we'd stayed that 3rd night like we'd planned. I don't want to know, but I'm certain of one thing. He's still there, waiting in those woods, arranging his perfect circles of snowballs, testing tent zippers in the night, and sometimes, when it snows heavily and the world goes quiet, I swear I can hear footsteps circling my house. I haven't slept properly since I left Adam's place last week. I keep checking my locks and jumping at every little noise outside my apartment. I thought I was doing my friend a favor by agreeing to house-sit his cabin while he went on vacation. But now I can't stop thinking about those 3 days and how differently things could have ended. It started innocently enough. Adam needed someone to watch his place for a week. A small rustic cabin about 30 miles outside of town. He's got 2 Australian shepherds, Toby and Luna, who needed daily care, and I figured it would be a nice break from my cramped apartment and endless Zoom meetings. A peaceful winter retreat with 2 friendly dogs and a wood stove sounded perfect. I could work remotely from there during the day and enjoy the quiet evenings away from the city noise. When Adam dropped off his spare key at my place before leaving, he went through the usual stuff, where he kept the dog food, how to work the somewhat temperamental wood stove, the quirks of the water heater. It was only as he was heading out the door that he casually mentioned his neighbor. "Oh, and you might see Ray around. Don't worry about him." I remember stopping him. "Ray?" "Yeah, lives about a quarter mile down the road. Bit of a loner, drinks a lot. Harmless guy, though." Adam waved it off like it was nothing. "He sometimes walks around the property line. Been doing it for years. Just ignore him if you see him." I didn't think much about it at the time. Rural areas often have eccentric neighbors, and I figured Adam wouldn't leave me there if there was any real danger. So stupid of me, looking back. I arrived at the cabin around 4 p.m. on Monday. The sun was already starting to set. Those short winter days make everything feel more isolated. The cabin was just as I remembered from my previous visits. Small but cozy, tucked into a clearing surrounded by dense pine forest, with a gravel driveway that connected to a rarely used country road. Toby and Luna were excited to see me, jumping around as I brought in my bags and groceries. After settling in, I took the dogs for a walk around the property, trying to get my bearings. The snow was about 6 inches deep, pristine and untouched except for animal tracks. Adam's land wasn't huge, maybe 5 acres, but the trees created natural boundaries. I couldn't see any other houses from the cabin, though I knew there must be some within walking distance. That first evening was exactly what I'd hoped for. I built a fire in the wood stove, made dinner, and spent a few hours reading with the dogs curled up at my feet. Around 9 p.m., I let the dogs out for their final bathroom break before bed. That's when things first felt off. Toby suddenly went rigid on the porch, his ears perked forward, staring into the darkness beyond the yard. Luna joined him seconds later, both of them completely alert. Then they started barking, not their usual playful barks, but deep, threatening growls that made the hair on my arms stand up. I flipped on the exterior lights and peered out into the yard. At first I didn't see anything, just snow reflecting the yellow porch light and darkness beyond. Then I noticed movement at the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the house. A man was standing there, partially obscured by the shadows of the pine trees. He wasn't moving, just standing completely still, facing the cabin. I couldn't make out his features from that distance, just his silhouette, tall and lean, wearing what looked like a heavy coat and hat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the cold air. "Can I help you?" No response. The man didn't move or acknowledge me in any way. The dogs continued their aggressive barking, and Luna actually tried to bolt off the porch before I grabbed her collar. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, my heart hammering in my chest, before the figure finally turned and walked into the trees, disappearing from sight. I hurried the dogs inside, double-checked all the locks, and drew the curtains closed. I told myself it must be Ray, the neighbor Adam mentioned, just taking one of his usual walks around the property line. But why would he just stand there, staring at the house? And why at night, in the freezing cold? I didn't sleep well that first night. The cabin creaked and settled as the temperature dropped, and every sound had me sitting upright in bed. The dogs seemed unsettled too. Toby pacing between the bedroom door and the window, occasionally growling softly. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. It was probably just Ray checking to see who was staying at Adam's place. I had my coffee and took the dogs out for their morning walk, trying to shake off my uneasiness. That's when I noticed the footprints in the snow. They circled the entire cabin, a single set of large boot prints that hadn't been there the previous afternoon when I arrived. They started at the tree line where I'd seen the figure standing, made a complete loop around the house, lingering especially long by the bedroom window, before heading back toward a narrow trail that disappeared into the woods. My stomach dropped. This wasn't someone casually passing by. This person had deliberately walked around the entire cabin, stopping to look in windows. I followed the tracks to where they entered the woods, but stopped at the tree line. The trail continued deeper into the forest, but there was no way I was following it alone. I called Adam immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying not to sound as freaked out as I felt, asking him to call me back about his neighbor Ray. Then I texted him too, for good measure. Throughout the day, I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. I kept getting up to check out the windows, scanning the tree line for any movement. The dogs sensed my anxiety and stayed close, which was somewhat comforting. By mid-afternoon, I'd convinced myself that I was overreacting. Ray was just curious about who was staying at Adam's place. Weird approach, sure, but not necessarily threatening. As dusk approached, my nerves returned. I made dinner early, fed the dogs, and made sure all the curtains were drawn before it got dark. Around 7 p.m., Toby started growling again, staring at the front door. Luna joined in seconds later, both dogs on high alert. My heart racing, I moved to the window beside the door and carefully peeked out through a small gap in the curtains. He was back, standing in the yard this time, much closer to the cabin than the night before. Maybe 20 feet from the porch, just standing there in the dim glow from the porch light, staring directly at the house. He wore a dark wool hat pulled low and a heavy canvas jacket. His face was partially obscured by the hat and what looked like several days of beard growth, but I could tell he was older, maybe in his 60s, with a gaunt face. I felt a surge of anger push through my fear. This was ridiculous. This guy had no right to be creeping around, scaring me like this. I flipped on the exterior lights and opened the door, keeping the dogs inside and the storm door locked between us. "Hey!" I shouted through the glass. "Can I help you with something?" The man didn't respond. He just tilted his head slightly to one side, still staring. "I'm staying here for the week, watching Adam's place," I continued, my voice shaking slightly despite my attempt to sound authoritative. "Are you Ray?" At the mention of his name, the man's posture changed. He straightened up and took a step backward. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the trees, his pace unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "Don't come back!" I yelled after him, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'll call the police next time." He never looked back, just disappeared into the darkness between the pines. I closed and locked the door, my hands trembling. The dogs were still growling, moving restlessly between the front door and the windows. I checked all the locks again, pushed a chair against the front door for good measure, and kept the lights on in every room. Around 11 p.m. I finally crawled into bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep. The dogs were on the bed with me, something Adam probably wouldn't approve of, but I needed their warmth and their alertness. I must have dozed off eventually, because I jerked awake some time later to both dogs standing rigid on the bed, their hackles raised, growling low and menacing toward the bedroom door. The digital clock read 2:17 a.m. Something had woken them, and me. I strained to listen, trying to control my breathing. Then I heard it, a soft creak from the front porch, the unmistakable sound of a floorboard flexing under weight. Someone was on the porch. I slid out of bed as quietly as possible, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The dogs followed me closely as I crept toward the front of the cabin. Another creak, this time louder, closer to the front window. I approached the living room window that faced the porch, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Very slowly, I pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to peek out. My flashlight beam caught him crouched by the window, his face inches from the glass, hands cupped around his eyes as he peered in. Our eyes met for a split second before he jerked backward, startled by the sudden light. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sight of his face so close, those bloodshot eyes staring directly at me. It was like something from a nightmare. The dogs erupted into frenzied barking, throwing themselves against the front door. The man scrambled backward on the porch but didn't run away. Instead, he stood there, just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam, watching me through the window. "Get away from here right now," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and rage. "I've called the police." I hadn't, but he didn't know that. He didn't move. I grabbed the fire poker from beside the wood stove, the only weapon-like object within reach. I held it up so he could see it through the window. "I swear to God, if you don't leave right now, I'll come out there and—" I didn't finish the sentence because he suddenly smiled, a weird, crooked smile that showed yellowed teeth. Then he held up his hands in mock surrender and backed away, step by step, until he reached the edge of the porch. With that same unsettling smile, he turned and walked off into the darkness. I collapsed onto the couch, shaking uncontrollably, the fire poker still clutched in my hand. I called 911, but the dispatcher explained that the nearest deputy was over 40 minutes away. She took my information and said they'd send someone as soon as possible, but suggested I call back immediately if the man returned. I stayed on the couch, lights on, dogs alert beside me, fire poker in hand. Every sound outside made me flinch, the wind in the trees, branches scraping against the roof. The police never showed up. I called again around 5 a.m., and they claimed a deputy had driven by but seen nothing suspicious. They suggested I call Adam or perhaps stay somewhere else if I was uncomfortable. As soon as there was enough light, I packed my things. I couldn't stay another night. The dogs seemed to sense we were leaving and stayed unusually close as I loaded my car. I did one final sweep of the cabin, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything essential, then hustled the dogs into the back seat of my car. As I was locking the front door, I glanced toward the trail where the footprints had led the previous morning. My blood went cold. Ray was standing there, maybe 100 yards away, at the edge of the trees. Even from that distance, I could see the whiskey bottle dangling from his hand. He raised it slightly, almost like a toast, that same unsettling smile on his face. I practically dove into my car, started the engine, and tore down the gravel driveway, spitting rocks behind me. In my rearview mirror, I could see him watching until I turned onto the main road and lost sight of him. I drove straight to a friend's house in town and called Adam from there. When he finally called back hours later, his reaction wasn't what I expected. "Oh, was Ray bothering you? Sorry about that." I described everything, the circling footprints, the staring, the middle of the night window peeping. Adam sighed. "Yeah, he gets weird sometimes, especially when he's been drinking. He's harmless mostly. Been my neighbor for years. Never actually hurt anyone. Mostly harmless. Mostly." "Adam, he was looking in your windows at 2 a.m. Look, I'm really sorry. I should have warned you better. Ray's got some issues, but he's just territorial, I guess. Likes to know who's around. I'm used to him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Adam was normalizing behavior that had terrified me to my core. I told him I'd left his dogs with my friend and that he needed to make other arrangements. It's been a week now, and I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. I keep seeing Ray's face in my mind, that strange, crooked smile as he backed away from the porch. Adam's words echo in my head. Harmless, mostly? What does mostly mean? And how close did I come to discovering otherwise? I still get shivers every time the temperature drops below freezing. It's been over 2 years, but I can't shake what happened out there. I've never shared this publicly before, partly because I know most people won't believe me, and partly because putting it into words makes it feel real all over again. This past weekend was the anniversary of when we lost Mia and Jake, and I finally feel ready to write this down. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm not crazy after all. It started as a simple winter camping trip. Mia had this obsession with wilderness photography and convinced the rest of us, me, Jake, and Nate, that camping in Black Ridge Forest in January would yield spectacular shots with pristine winter light or something equally pretentious. I didn't want to go initially. I hate the cold, and the idea of voluntarily sleeping outside when it's below freezing seemed completely insane to me. But Mia was persuasive. She'd been dating Jake for about 8 months, and they were in that phase where they did everything together. Nate and I had been friends with Jake since high school, so we got roped in by default. Nate was actually excited about it. He's one of those outdoorsy types who owns way too much REI gear. I only agreed because they promised we'd have adequate shelter, heat, and booze. We drove up early Friday morning in Jake's Subaru, packed to the ceiling with gear. The forecast predicted light snow but otherwise clear conditions. Black Ridge Forest is about 4 hours north of town, and the road got progressively worse as we approached. The last 7 miles were on a poorly maintained Forest Service road that hadn't been plowed recently. Jake's all-wheel drive handled it decently, but we were crawling by the time we reached the trailhead. From there, we had to hike about 2 miles to reach the campsite Mia had picked out. a clearing near Stillwater Lake. In summer, this place probably got a fair amount of visitors, but in January, we had the entire forest to ourselves. The rangers at the entrance station seemed surprised to see anyone at all. "You folks be careful out there," the older ranger had said as he handed back our permits. "Weather can change quick this time of year, and stay off the lake unless you're sure about the ice thickness." I remember being struck by how quiet everything was once we started hiking. Sound just disappeared in the snow. Our footsteps made that crunching noise that's oddly satisfying, but beyond that, there was nothing. No birds, no distant traffic, no wind. Just complete stillness that somehow felt heavy on my ears. The hike took us longer than expected because we were loaded down with winter gear. By the time we reached the clearing, the sun was already starting to dip toward the horizon. I have to admit, despite my complaints, the place was breathtaking. The lake stretched out in front of us, completely frozen and dusted with a thin layer of snow that sparkled in the late afternoon light. The trees around the clearing were tall pines, their branches heavy with white. It looked like something from a Christmas card. Nate and Jake got to work setting up our 2 tents while Mia wandered around taking photos, and I gathered wood for a fire. It was cold, probably in the low 20s, but the physical activity kept us warm. By dusk, we had a decent camp established. 2 four-season tents, a fire pit with stones arranged around it, and a makeshift kitchen area on a tarp. That first night was actually kind of fun. We built a roaring fire, cooked some surprisingly decent freeze-dried meals, and passed around a flask of whiskey to keep warm. Mia, always the storyteller, insisted we tell ghost stories to properly christen our wilderness adventure. Jake went first, with some standard story about a hitchhiker who disappears from the back seat. Nate told one about a haunted mine that was supposedly nearby. When it was Mia's turn, she got this weird, serious look on her face. "The locals have a story about this lake," she said, her voice dropping lower. "Back in the 1800s, there was a trapper who got caught in an early blizzard. He was crossing the lake when the storm hit, and he couldn't find his way to shore. They found him weeks later, frozen solid in the middle of the lake, still standing upright. They say he still wanders these woods in the winter, always cold, looking for warmth. If you see him at the edge of the trees, you should run, because he'll try to take your heat for himself." "Where'd you hear that?" Nate asked, looking genuinely unsettled. "I did some research before we came," Mia shrugged. "Thought it would make for good fireside material." I remember laughing it off, but I also remember glancing toward the dark line of trees beyond our fire's light. The story had that unsettling quality that the best campfire tales have, just plausible enough to make you wonder. We turned in around midnight. Jake and Mia shared one tent, while Nate and I took the other. Despite the cold, I actually slept pretty well that first night. The combination of physical exertion, whiskey, and my high-quality sleeping bag kept me comfortable. The next day was spent hiking, taking photos, and exploring the area around the lake. We found some animal tracks, deer, rabbit, and what Nate swore were wolf prints, but were probably just from a large dog. Mia was in heaven, capturing shots of frozen waterfalls and ice formations along the shoreline. I have to admit, I was starting to enjoy myself despite the cold. There's something pure about a landscape completely covered in snow, untouched by anything but wildlife. We had a late lunch back at camp, and as the afternoon wore on, Mia suggested exploring the lake itself. "The ice is definitely thick enough," she said, tapping her boot against the edge where it met the shore. "It has to be at least a foot thick. We could walk right across." "I don't know," I said. "That ranger specifically warned us about the ice. He meant for idiots who don't check first, Jake said, siding with Mia as always. Look, you can see where people have been ice fishing. He pointed to some small, distant, dark spots on the lake's surface. Nate seemed hesitant too, but he didn't argue. Just be careful, he said, and take the flashlights. It'll be getting dark soon. I decided to stay behind. Something about walking on frozen water just didn't sit right with me, no matter how thick the ice was. Nate initially planned to go but changed his mind at the last minute, saying he wanted to chop more firewood before nightfall. So it was just Mia and Jake who set off across the ice around 4 p.m. I watched them from shore for a while, two dark figures against all that white, getting smaller and smaller. Mia kept stopping to take photos, and Jake would wait for her to catch up. Eventually, they were just tiny specks near the center of the lake. Nate and I busied ourselves around camp, gathering more wood and preparing dinner. The sun set early, around 5:30, and by 6 p.m. it was fully dark. We had a good fire going, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. I checked my watch. They've been gone almost 2 hours, I said to Nate. Should we be worried? They probably just lost track of time, he replied, but I could hear the concern in his voice. Mia probably wanted to get some sunset shots over the lake. By 7 p.m., with no sign of them and no response to our shouts across the lake, we decided we needed to look for them. We put on our headlamps, grabbed the emergency kit, and headed out onto the ice. The lake wasn't massive, maybe half a mile across, but in the darkness, with just our headlamp beams cutting through the black, it felt enormous. We followed their tracks as best we could, calling their names every few minutes. Our voices echoed strangely across the ice, coming back to us distorted and hollow. We reached what we thought was the middle of the lake and found no sign of them. Their tracks seemed to continue toward the far shore, so we kept going. The ice beneath our feet occasionally made low groaning sounds that sent spikes of fear through my chest, though Nate assured me this was normal for lake ice. As we approached the far shore, I noticed something strange. There was a figure standing at the edge of the trees, perfectly still. At first I hoped it was Jake or Mia, but as we got closer, I could tell it was too tall, much too tall. Nate, I whispered, grabbing his arm. Look, at the tree line. Nate stopped and raised his headlamp. The beam illuminated what appeared to be a person in ragged, dark clothing, standing motionless where the ice met the shore. They were easily 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, and completely still. Hello? Nate called out, his voice cracking slightly. Have you seen our friends? The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there. Maybe it's a tree, I suggested, though I knew it wasn't. Trees don't wear clothes. Trees don't stand on 2 legs. We continued forward cautiously, still calling for Mia and Jake. We were maybe 50 yards from shore when the figure moved. It didn't step or walk. It glided. 1 second it was at the edge of the trees, and the next it had moved 10 feet onto the ice without any visible steps. No sound, no shifting of weight. Just there, and then somewhere else. I felt my entire body go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Nate must have felt the same because he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. We need to go back, he whispered urgently. Now. We turned and started walking quickly back toward our camp. I couldn't help looking over my shoulder, and what I saw still haunts my dreams. The figure was following us, still not walking, just appearing in different positions, each one closer than the last. And it was moving faster than we were. Run! I gasped, and we both broke into a sprint across the ice. Running on ice in winter boots isn't easy. We slipped and stumbled, our headlamps bouncing wildly, throwing disorienting shadows across the frozen surface. I fell once, hard, slamming my knee into the ice, but adrenaline pushed me back up in an instant. I looked back again. The figure was maybe 30 yards behind us now. In the chaotic swinging of my headlamp, I caught glimpses of it. A gaunt face, skin like weathered leather, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. The rags it wore fluttered around its skeletal frame, though there was no wind. We reached our side of the lake and scrambled up the small embankment to our campsite. The fire was still burning, throwing warm orange light across our tents. We burst into the circle of light, gasping and terrified. "Did you see that?" Nate panted, bent over with his hands on his knees. "What the fuck was that?" I turned to look back at the lake, expecting to see the figure approaching our camp, but there was nothing, just the dark expanse of ice, silent and empty. We spent the next hour calling for Mia and Jake, using our emergency whistle, and even firing off the one emergency flare we had brought along. Nothing, no response. The forest absorbed our calls and gave nothing back. Neither of us slept that night. We kept the fire roaring, sitting back to back so we could watch in all directions, jumping at every crack of the ice and groan of the trees in the cold. We discussed hiking out in the dark to get help, but the trail was treacherous enough in daylight. Attempting it at night seemed suicidal. As the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, we packed up camp as quickly as possible. We left Mia and Jake's tent and most of their gear, taking only their ID and phones. Part of me still hoped they had somehow made it to shore and were waiting for daylight to find their way back. We practically ran the 2 miles back to the trailhead and drove straight to the ranger station. The same older ranger was there, and his face grew grim as we stumbled through our explanation of what had happened. A search and rescue operation was launched immediately. 3 rangers went out with us back to the campsite while others called in additional help. They seemed concerned, but not surprised when we mentioned Mia and Jake had been on the ice. "Happens almost every winter," one of the younger rangers muttered. "People underestimate how dangerous frozen lakes can be." They searched the lake thoroughly, including drilling through the ice in various spots. By late afternoon, they found an area where the ice was thinner, with what appeared to be a recent break that had refrozen. The head ranger explained that Mia and Jake had likely fallen through and that currents under the ice would have carried their bodies away from the break point. "The lake will give them back in spring," he said solemnly, "when the ice melts." I tried to tell them about the figure we had seen, but Nate kicked my foot and gave me a warning look. Later, he explained that we'd sound crazy, and they might think we were somehow involved in Mia and Jake's disappearance. So we kept quiet about that part. The official report listed it as an accidental drowning. Mia and Jake's families were devastated, of course. The recovery operation continued into spring, but their bodies were never found. I know what the Rangers believe happened. I understand the official explanation, but I was there. I saw that thing by the lake, not walking, but sliding across the ice without making a sound. I saw its eyes reflect in my headlamp, and sometimes, when it's particularly cold and I'm alone at night, I swear I can feel it watching me through my window, still looking for warmth. Nate and I don't talk about it anymore. He moved to Arizona shortly after it happened, said he needed to be somewhere warm year-round. I don't blame him. The thing is, I looked up the story Mia told us that night. There was no record of a trapper freezing on that lake, no local legend about a cold spirit wandering the woods. She made it up entirely for our entertainment, or so I thought. But how did she know? How could she possibly have described what we would see the very next night? I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and I still can't make sense of it. All I know is that something unnatural lives in those woods, something that doesn't move like a person, something that took my friends, and I still feel like it's not done with me.